is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mr. Barr on assignment today. Amy Morris in Washington driving our news coverage this morning. We'll go to Amy here in a bit. And David Gura is in for Paul Sweeney. Sweeney is down at his school. I think it's east of Chapel
About 10
Hill.
miles away, I understand. I've been there a time or two.
Once or twice in your
I don't
life.
like to go there, but
Right.
I'm sure he's having a good time.
But it's good to have David Gura with this world turned upside down. Whatever your political beliefs, we're going to pay respect to them today. Try to drive forward the conversation to get to the weekend, to get to 2025 and an inauguration of President-elect Trump. And to get in, I calculated it early, David. I've got let me get my computer. Welcome, folks, to the No Sleep Studio. Worldwide.
He's got his Texas Instruments, pulling it out of his pocket here.
I got it here. We are 1,460 days to election 2028.
We'll get that countdown clock here in the studio.
So we are good.
Get ready.
Good to have David Gura with us, and we'll get some Philadelphia stories from him as well. I got to put my reading glasses on. The intern, it's like Pico font size 3.2. For those of you on radio, I'm struggling here with the famous Tom Keene reading glasses.
Very sharp.
Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers, their forecast trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast. Get started today. That's ibkr.com/forecast. And get started today. We thank Interactive Brokers for foundational support. David, I got 8 ways to go here, but let's just start with the elephant in the room, no pun intended, the Republican House. Can we say that yet?
Not yet, no. I think they're still counting out in California, and looking forward to talking with our friends at the Cook Political Report a little later this morning just to see where things stand. But Hakeem Jeffries, who has been the minority leader, holding on to hope he's going to be the Speaker of the House here come January, but no determination yet. They got to pick up 4 seats to do that.
A lot of discussion, of course, off the Fed meeting yesterday. Fascinating Fed meeting to hear the force of Jerome Powell's comments as well. And then, of course, also we have to look at the markets here, some earnings out. Sebastian Page starts us off strong here in a moment. Right now, from the Interactive Brokers Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got red on the screen this morning after another record close on Wall Street. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 62 points. Dow futures down 3 points. S&P futures down about 6. Want to head over to currencies right now. We have the dollar. It's edging just a bit lower right now. Chinese yuan, that's what I want to point out. It's down about 0.5%. This is after China announced $1.4 trillion program to allow those local governments to refinance debt. Bond yields, commodities also falling with that. So we have the 2-year yield 4.18%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.31%, and that's down about 1 basis point. To earnings we go. 2 of the largest online reservation companies. Strong outlook suggested travel growth isn't slowing as fast as expected. Expedia shares up about 4%. Airbnb, their shares were higher. Right now they're down about 4%. And shares of Pinterest down 12%. It delivered a weak holiday outlook. And finally, EV maker Rivian. It said it's still on track to report its first ever gross profit by the year's end. And that's despite a parts shortage. Shares, though, are there up about 0.2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Somebody emailed in and said, please put Lisa in with the newspapers just to break up all the post-electoral tension. Well, we're going to have a special broadcast of the Mateo Report here in about
I like that name, the Mateo Report.
The Mateo Report.
Yeah,
you know, it's great. Steve Colbert called me up and said, would you give her some respect? And we said, okay. Sebastian Page is with us right now, and this is absolutely perfect. Forget about the election. Forget about the world of David Gura. Forget about this. Forget about the horror we're seeing in Amsterdam this morning. We'll have notes on that and news. Forget about it all. You're at the kitchen table this weekend and you have to allocate. His book is Beyond Diversification. He single-handedly moved the Baltimore Orioles forward into September, not October. Sebastian Page joins from T. Rowe Price. If you have to write your book this morning, given the political trauma, plus and minus, depending what side you're on, how do you allocate off an election?
If you're asking, Tom, everybody to forget about the election, I think that's a big ask. It's been a stressful week for the country. And by the way, you said this is the no sleep studio. You all look fully energized this morning.
Thank you.
So the red light goes on.
Yeah. The number one thing I would consider when looking at portfolio construction, how you allocate your assets from a longer term perspective, is how we think of the stock-bond correlation. You know, that's a bit of a nerdy thing. It's actually super important to how you put portfolios
Where is that
together.
right now?
My view is that inflation volatility is going to be higher than we've experienced pre-pandemic for the longer term. And that means when you get inflation shocks, that stocks and bonds move together. We saw it in 2022, and I think it's a regime shift. And what it means is if you target a risk level and you assume that stocks and bonds are going to diversify each other perfectly, that assumption needs to be stress tested. So you might be running a high risk portfolio than you would otherwise think.
Dean Kernert was in yesterday. We can't have, David, we can't have Dean Kernert and Sebastian Page in the same room. It's too much intellect. Okay, Kernert was in and he noted the lack of correlation among Mag 7. What does that signal to Sebastian Page that NVIDIA's got a life totally different from Apple?
That in part explains why the Mag 7 has done so well over time, because it's actually a diversified basket. We think of the Mag 7 as
strongly
this
agree.
thing, this new asset
Editorializing,
class.
strongly agree with what he just
all
said.
right.
Continue.
Thank you. That always makes me feel good when Tom Keene agrees with me. But it's such a big asset class, if you want to call it an asset class. There are 3 stocks in there that are now over the size of small caps overall, right? So that's why as asset allocators, we've never looked at stocks so much. We're not supposed to be stock pickers, but it matters. It moves markets. Markets are concentrated. It explains the valuation on the S&P 500, which looks really high, but when you adjust for the quality of these companies, it's actually not super high by historical standard. It's just slightly above median.
We're all here trying to figure out what's going to change in the coming months. Certainly when it comes to inflation, I'll confess I was watching a rival network a few days ago when you were on, and you made the admission that going into the election, you didn't change your positioning at all. How are you thinking about what may be inherently inflationary going into this next presidential term, and how does that change, if anything, your perspective? How are you hedging against inflation at this point in time?
So tactically in our asset allocation portfolios going into the election, we were slightly long stocks. Still a lot of enthusiasm priced in markets, so we don't want to take a large overweight position, but positive on the economy. We were short duration, which means we have more cash and more stocks and less bonds around our strategic asset mix, and we were long value stocks. And the election, really you saw an immediate reaction on deregulation, on, of course, inflation and lower taxes. And all these themes, I think, help with a portfolio that we had going in. Look, we don't always get it right, just to be clear, but that's why we're not really changing our asset mix right now.
You listened, of course, to the Fed chair yesterday, who expressed his continued optimism, cautious as it may be, about the economy. Do you share his optimism about the path of the U.S. economy going forward?
Yeah, it's hard to find bearish investors these days, and that sometimes in itself is a warning sign. So let me try to give you a quick bearish narrative so we can
please.
Include it.
So,
Both sides
so we
here,
can use it as a straw
Equal
man,
time,
right?
yeah.
Look at the manufacturing PMIs, 47, that's contraction. Look at the yield curve, it's disinverting, that usually happens around a recession. And look at the increase on unemployment, 70 basis points over about 18 months. That's also typically a recession signal. That's pretty much what's left of the bearish narrative on the economy. Then look at how you can basically tear it down by looking at the CD surprise index. The services ISM at 56, they were at 49 in June. The Fed stimulating the overall low level of unemployment, in other words, high employment in the economy, fiscal pedal to the metal, and GDP now being about 50 basis points higher than it was at the beginning of the year.
To put a bow on this quickly, Sebastian, we got to get you in the coming days here. The bottom line to me is we're going to get a goosed nominal GDP. Is our animal spirit going to be an inflation pop spirit, or can President-elect Trump generate real economic growth of 2.83 or 3.2%?
Tom, I think that may be the most important question.
Whoa.
I'm leaving
coming
solo
out of
from
Nice
here.
to see you, Tom.
Because look, the 10-year is actually round-trip this week.
Yeah.
And so are we underpricing inflation volatility? I'm not talking about 8-9% like we had with a supply chain disruption and Russia invading Ukraine, but could we go back to 4.5 over a 3-month period? January, February, March this year. If you annualize the month-over-month CPI, we were at 4.5%. So what happens if we get that? Let's say a commodity shock, sticky services inflation.
Listen to you.
So it's a risk, and that's why we remain short duration. But we are in a cutting cycle. So
We got to go. Sebastian Page, thank you so much for starting us strong here on this Friday. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
Thank you, Tom. Leaders of Israel and the Netherlands are condemning what they called anti-Semitic attacks on fans of soccer club Maccabi Tel Aviv before and after a Europa League soccer match. The mayor of Amsterdam now says they didn't know of any concrete threat before the match. The violence erupted despite a ban on a pro-Palestinian demonstration near the soccer stadium. Details were not clear, but Israel ordered that 2 planes be sent to the Dutch capital to bring those Israelis home. A rapidly growing brush fire in the Los Angeles area has burned out of control, destroying homes and triggering evacuations northwest of Malibu. Ventura County Sheriff Jim Freihoff.
To date, we've evacuated over 400 homes, 250 residents choosing to stay and protect their homes, and there were 800 homes that no one was home, so assuming they had either left before we arrived, were at work, or otherwise out of town.
Hundreds of firefighters are battling that blaze. More than 14,000 evacuation notices sent. The FBI says it's in touch with the Justice Department over racist text messages sent to Black Americans across the country. A Detroit resident named Renee received one of those texts.
They have raked in thousands of dollars.
Multiple news outlets are reporting that some of the texts were sent to voicemail, identifying them as users of Text Now. That service says it shut down the accounts as soon as it became aware. Senate Republicans, South Dakota's John Thune, Texas's John Cornyn, and Florida's Rick Scott are all vying to be the next Senate Majority Leader. They're looking to replace Kentucky Republican Mitch McConnell, who is stepping aside. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, and Lisa.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. David Gura, this is the PhillyBurbs.com. Purple Bucks County. What did you learn from Bucks County having a gimlet at the bar in Philly?
I'll ask this of our guests throughout the morning, is how much this political terrain has shifted permanently. But everyone that I spoke to in and around Bucks County said things were on a razor's edge. They're very close, and we've seen this shift over these last many years. I'm curious if that shift is permanent, but a lot of people still looking at the data of those who turned out and actually voted in and around Philadelphia, wondering if that Democratic stronghold is a bygone thing.
Is the turnout, the lack of turnout, is that germane? I mean, is all the Democrats are hand-wringing, is it really about turnout?
It is, in large part. There was a base that they were counting on to come out, and they didn't, and I think that's what the soul searching is about. How could they not count on that base that they needed to get to the polls on Election Day?
A lot of vignettes with David Gura here through the morning. A reason to stay with us for 3 hours, and we'll have some really good conversation. We are thrilled to tell you James Stavridis, the former Supreme Commander of NATO, I believe in the 9 o'clock hour, Admiral Stavridis, to be with us. Futures at -8, the VIX well under 16, 15.18.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Cohn Resnick, advisory, assurance, tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. All right, moving forward right now. Futures still in the red. This is following the Fed's unanimous decision to cut rates by a quarter point. Now, Chair Jay Powell said he doesn't rule out or in a December rate cut. He also said that the election will have no effect on policy in the near term, and he added that he would not step aside if asked by President-elect Donald Trump. So we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 61 points. Dow futures down about 11. S&P futures down 0.1% or 7 points. Just a side note, NVIDIA, Sherwin-Williams joining the Dow today. They're replacing Intel and Dow Inc. All right, over to the two-year yield, 4.18%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%, and that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude down nearly 1% at $74 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,689 an ounce. Shares of Boston-based DraftKings down 7%, cut its full-year estimate for 2024 revenue and profit. And then Sony ADRs, they're up 7%. It raised its revenue outlook after PlayStation sales beat. And finally, shares of salad chain Sweetgreen down 16%. Higher costs are driving bigger losses. I know you're a fan of them, David. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You been to Sweetgreen, Tom? No.
I stood outside.
I waited for me.
Stood outside and said, how many digits to the left would 6 salads cost? What a racket. Don't get me going. This is a joy. You wonder, how does Gura do it? How can Gura be that smart? He sat there and he would read the Almanac of American Politics to his children as they went to bed at night. The Almanac of American Politics is like 1,000 pages. It's brilliant on every congressional district. I miss it every day. And helping edit that was Jessica Taylor. She was a senior breakthrough officer for the Almanac of American Politics. And David Gura with a Cook Political Report. Why don't you bring her in on what she's publishing about Monday? I want to know where Jessica Taylor is Monday.
Well, Jessica, let's start there. It's great to speak with you. We can get Tom a copy of that almanac. We just have
we start work on it next week, actually, for the next edition. So I am quickly turning around doing that. So, yeah.
Are you going to know by Monday who controls the House? Where are we in the counting of votes in those, 30 outstanding districts across this country?
Yeah, it's unclear if we'll know by Monday. I think that we're still waiting on some of those key California districts. But I think there's a very thinning path rather to get to 218 for Democrats. That's what's becoming clear.
Annie Carney of the Times out with a piece this morning about Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez of Washington State. She complaining to Annie just about how she felt she was ignored by the mainstream Democratic Party. She had complaints about where things were going. She felt she was ignored by the candidate herself at a Christmas party. The grievances range from kind of macro to micro. But I want to use that as kind of a pivot to ask you about how much what we've been talking about over these last few days about the Democratic Party broadly trickles down to these races for House seats. Are the complaints universal about the degree to which the Democratic Party has left voters behind? Or if we look at these races one by one, be they in Washington State or California or elsewhere, are there places where the kind of main messaging that the Democrats have worked?
Yeah. So just to update you, I am looking at our latest projections here at Cook that we are putting out this morning. And right now, Republicans, we have them winning so far 212. So they're just shy of 6 seats at the 218. And we think probably the ceiling they can get is a 5-seat gain, which would bring them to 226. But that's still up in the air. But to ask about the individual things, I think that Democrats that managed to win were ones that had strong individual brands. Not only Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez there in Washington, but Jared Golden in Maine looks like he's held on, even as Trump carried that congressional district. But then, other Democrats that we didn't think were perhaps as in danger got swamped by sort of the tide. I think they're in Pennsylvania, which I heard you all talking about before with Matt Cartwright and Susan Wild in Pennsylvania losing both of those seats. But then, when I'm looking at the Senate map, someone like Tammy Baldwin managed to win very narrowly. Alyssa Slotkin, they both, I think, were able to run stronger in rural areas, not win those, but to do better. And I think that's coming with knowing the areas, and that they had a unique brand sort of separate from the Democratic Party enough where they were able to convince voters to trust to vote for them, even as they voted for Trump.
In the Washington Post, I believe this morning, there's a fabulous article that Mr. Trump has power. Everyone agrees with that, but maybe less power to drive the House and Senate. Where do you stand on that? I mean, I'm waiting for Charlie Cook to write one of his wonderful essays about this. Is it a landslide? Is it a power shift? Or do we overplay that right now?
Well, at least when I'm looking at the Senate, they have at least 53 seats right now, and I think that's probably where it's going to land. The AP is called Pennsylvania, so they flipped West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana, but those three were always the ones we expected were the most. So again, Republicans left seats on the table because for the first time, we've had multiple seats that split their tickets in the Trump era. With it, the races in Arizona and Nevada aren't called, but it looks like those are going to vote Democratic at the Senate level.
Right.
But heavily Republican at the presidential level. So this could have been much worse. That's my piece that I have out this morning in the table. And that's because Democrats were spending heavily. They managed to sort of ward off some of this. In Arizona, they had we hear candidates. So it could have been worse. And remember that much like, I think this was sort of Democrats' worry if they only got to 52 or something, which they've got one more at least, it looks like, that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski of Maine could wield overwhelming influence as the moderates within the GOP. Right. How they go about that could matter. But, if Republicans have gained a few seats in the House that we saw what that 4-seat majority did last time. But, the last time Trump had a trifecta was when he came in 2017 and they weren't able to get everything passed. And it's just 2 years probably because we see typically that a president's party faces backlash in that regard. So, I think they're going to have to push through tax cuts and renewing those tax cuts and anything that they want to do in this 2 years. But again, they have a little bit bigger majority in the House, but it's not huge. And, again, if some of those Republicans in California are reelected wins, that they could be sitting in still very heavily Democratic areas. So they might not go along with the national party.
I'll get this out on Twitter and LinkedIn. Aaron Blake writing in the Washington Post, Trump's mandate isn't as, quote, powerful, unquote, as he suggests. Here's why. David, one more to Jessica, please.
Jessica, I just want to ask you about that so-called blue wall and where it stands today. I was in Wisconsin before the election, spent some time with Senator Baldwin, and just kind of noted how she was very confident that she was a known quantity. Love how everyone called her Tammy. There was no pretense in how people addressed her on the campaign trail. But she felt like she was kind of wandering around a terrain that had changed markedly since the last time she ran and the time before that. Our colleague Romaine Bostick was in Michigan saying Michigan no longer a blue state, saying that unequivocally. How do you see that stretch of the Rust Belt? Has it changed permanently?
I mean, I'm not sure that we can call it the blue wall anymore when we look at sort of Trump's victories there. I think that Democrats took the wrong lessons away from 2022 when they ran better candidates and when there was abortion on the ballot. I was talking with a Michigan Democrat yesterday and they said, listen, Gretchen Whitmer won that by 10, but she probably got at least a 4-point boost because of just the abortion referendum and how terrible of a candidate the Republican Tudor Dixon there was. So, again, you do need to run Democrats that have those brands. That's how Tammy Baldwin was able to survive. But I don't think that we can, I think there was a lot of talk going into this, like Michigan's not even on the table anymore. Look at Gretchen Whitmer's win. Look at that, Supreme Court race in Wisconsin and different things. Like these are moments in time. And when you have presidential turnout, it turns out differently than some of these special elections.
Right. Jessica, 15 seconds. When do I get the new Almanac of American Politics? How long does it take?
You can pre-order it.
The target date.
June?
So.
Okay, Jessica, thank you so much. Jessica Taylor with us, the Cook Political Report. She will publish, we'll put it out on Twitter and LinkedIn for you. Again, I can't say
You're
enough.
A subscriber, too. You're a Cook subscriber.
Subscribe to Cook Political Report. It's really, and they don't overwhelm you with 47 stories. There's some weight to each story, which I think is cool. The Almanac of American Politics, we'll look for that in
some weight to that
June.
as well, physical weight. I mean,
it's like
8 pounds.
value line for those of you in the investment world. David, I can't focus. Okay, I got NVIDIA as a Dow stock today.
And Sherwin-Williams.
Williams. I just,
paint the earth.
Good morning, Sherwin-Williams people. Cleveland, Ohio, 45,000 people. I get, it's paint. Like how many shades of white do you want?
Right. Get your kills. You do a lot of painting around the apartment?
I used to. I do less now. In my agedness, I do less. It's a little too much. It is a Friday. We've got a great lineup of guests. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Good morning on your commute across America.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures right now, well, pointing to more of a subdued end to this blockbuster week. The S&P 500 and Dow Industrial still on track, though, to deliver their best weekly performances in a year. Right now, we'll get to NASDAQ. Futures down 0.2%, 52 points. Dow futures, little change, down 2 points. S&P futures, little change, down about 5. We have the 2-year yield at 4.19%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%, and that's down 1 basis point. On the economic calendar for today, we have a read on sentiment from the University of Michigan. Now, that's expected to tick only slightly higher in November. Bloomberg Economics, though, say it could be affected by U.S. election results. To earnings we go. Paramount Global, big gains in streaming subscribers in the third quarter, but overall sales, they were a bit weaker than expected due to declines in TV, film revenue, but its shares up more than 1%. Guess they like those streaming subscribers. Companies making news. That's the information reporting that Amazon weighing a second multi-billion-dollar investment in OpenAI rival Anthropic. And Boeing CEO trying to mend those relations with workers after the strike. Kelly Ortberg says furloughed workers will be paid for lost time. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. Here's what we're going to do on a Friday. Our heads are spinning off the election, the political moment. Thrilled to have David Gura with us this morning. But now, for Global Wall Street, we're going to go wicked geek. Joining us now is Michael Shaoul. You know him from Market Field and Oscar Grush years ago. He is with Ion, am I pronouncing that? Ion, E-I-E-I-O.
Yes,
Ion
yes.
Asset Management. And on the front page of the Ion Asset Management website is my foundational thinking here, where Michael Shaoul divides the world into type 1 and type 2 errors. People that have heard me lecture on this will hear me say the type 2 construct as well. Type 2 errors, things that are not happening but are believed to be happening. What is that right now? What's not happening that we believe are happening?
You know, I don't think the Chinese economy is facing the kind of intractable problems that most people do. I think you're at the beginning of the Chinese economy, looking okay again. I do think the election puts a new hurdle in place. In the form of Trump and his tariff policies, which I think almost certainly some increase in tariffs on China is going to take place. But I think China's competitive position in 2025 is different to its competitive position in 2018. Its export industries are now starting to dominate products which are crucial to both the corporate and personal sector in the US and in Europe. It's not going to be quite as easy to shut them out of export markets.
So your claim is in commodities. We've had a long-term commodity collapse. You and Rishi Sharma lead the study of this. Can we go long commodities because we underestimate China's potential?
I think commodity prices, the industrial metals are too low today. I think that you're at the beginnings of the recovery. It's very, very noisy. I think that trading around big set pieces such as this morning's announcement of stimulus is excessive. So, you get money rushing in ahead and rushing out because the headline number isn't exactly what people want to see. But I think this is a process. I think Xi is in a position somewhat analogous to Draghi in 2011-12, or the U.S. Fed in 2000 and late 2008 through late 2009, maybe even Jackson Hole 2010, which is he's in the middle of a process where he tries to rebuild domestic confidence and international confidence in his country, and my guts are that he'll get that done eventually, but it'll be a noisy and bloody process.
About that process, so we're at a moment where we're kind of looking back to 2016 to 2020 and trying to recall what we've suppressed or forgotten about how all of it unfolded. Yeah. How is that happening in Beijing? In other words, what template do they have for how they responded to or engaged with the salvos from the U.S. in the trade war, and sort of what are they doing to prepare for whatever might come here if we get these 60% tariff, whatever comes from this new administration? How do they position themselves for it and keep up that effort to bolster confidence and strengthen the economy domestically there in China?
I think that the tariffs really came in place in 2018, and they were in response to China's completely unreasonable mercantilist trade policies themselves. So I'm certainly of the belief that the Chinese, started this battle. I think the difference this time is it really can't come as a surprise. I think they were surprised in 2018. Trump didn't run on a pro-tariff policy in 2016. It was something which developed as he came to understand what China's competitive trade positions had been. Look, what can they do? I think one thing they have done is made their industrial policy more competitive in terms of making unique products that the West either can't make anything like as cheaply or can't make can't make period. The other lever they have if they want to use it is currency. I do think you're going to see a managed devaluation of the yuan probably between now and early next year.
So do you go to a resilient, strong dollar, even though President-elect Trump will want weak dollar?
I think dollar yuan, not necessarily dollar euro, dollar sterling, but I think that the yuan at around 7 is, it's strong against the dollar. It could be 7.30, 7.40.
Right. You mentioned mercantilist. Do you perceive after the campaign that President Trump is running some form of mercantilist zero-sum policy?
I think his whole view of the world is transactional. I mean, he's a real estate guy. He does deals, and that's very different from a sort of classical liberal free trade. I'm talking economic liberal, obviously. Economic liberal free trade position, which is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's a world in which cooperation leads to greater wealth. I think a transactional view of the world does definitely lend itself to mercantilism. But as I say, I do believe that this, the Chinese were always mercantilist. The Chinese were always willing and able to take full advantage of the generosity of the global world order.
I want to ask you about the bond market. And Sebastian Page was in here talking about the round trip we've seen the 10-year take over the course of the week. Does that give you a framework of or a sense of what the range is for the 10-year, and how do you trade that, given what we've seen over the course of this week, and how are you just thinking about U.S. Treasuries in particular?
I think the Treasury market has been reasonably rational over the last sort of 6 to 9 months, and most of its move, obviously around the election, it's got its own volatility, but most of the moves we've seen, both in yields going down and yields going up, you can tie to the trend of economic data, which was, pretty weak compared to expectations between the spring and late summer, and has been pretty strong versus expectations mostly since then. In terms of a range, I don't know, 375 to 5 seems to be it's a big range, but but it's not it's not crazy. There's certainly, as I say, appetite for long-term yields at this level today. You see that the auction demand has basically picked up. I think the big question, if we look ahead to the next 4 years, is the Trump administration going to face the limits of fiscal policy at some point? You're not there today. Today, I think we've got to the point that people talk about fiscal issues in a way that they haven't for the last 20, 30 years. But we're yet to see the sort of response to policy that you saw in the UK in September 2022.
I want to get one more thing in here as well. Denise Pellegrini in our 3 a.m. meeting this morning mentioned SPX is now 50% or something of the global equity cap. Michael Shaoul on Mag 7, are you comfortable owning or adding to positions in the Mag 7?
I mean, I think most people own a hell of a lot of it. I mean, the good news is that they're still generating good news. I think that's absolutely critical. But this has been a broader equity market rally, particularly since the start of summer. Than we've seen for most of the last few years, and I think for people sort of chasing this equity market into the end of the year with a Trump administration, it's probably the Russell that people throw their money at.
I have to ask one personal question. You are supportive of the Tel Aviv University through their American friends. What relationship is the most constructive for the president-elect with Mr. Netanyahu? How should that be amended off of the Biden years?
I think the U.S. has been a good ally to Israel. I think Biden himself as president has been a good ally. I'm not sure the entire Democratic Party has, and the popularity of that policy has certainly been diminished. Look, Trump and Netanyahu, kind of speak the same language. I think there's questions whether, again, Netanyahu himself is going to be the prime minister for the majority of his presidency. There'll be an election there. There'll be an election there fairly early in the, I would say, the reign of Trump. It was a Freudian slip in the presidency of Trump. But I think that Trump is sort of generally viewed as being pro-Israel, subject to the limitations of his sort of inherent volatility.
Michael, thank you so much. Michael Shaoul with us. Don't be a stranger. Let's do this again with Ion Asset Management. I put out on Twitter and LinkedIn the website. It's great on a type 1, type 2 construct. Speaking of statistics, she's expert with our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Tom. Chalk up another battleground state win for Donald Trump, defeating Kamala Harris in Nevada, flipping a battleground that had previously backed Democrats in 2016 and 2020, bringing the electoral count to 295 for Trump and 226 for Harris. Now, the president-elect says he has spoken with Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky since winning the election, but not yet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Speaking at a gathering in Sochi, Putin shared his hopes for working with the new administration.
I do not want to comment now on what was said consciously during the election campaign. I think it was said deliberately in the fight for votes. But it does not matter. What was said in the desire to restore relations with Russia to help end the Ukrainian crisis, in my opinion, seems to deserve at least attention. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his election as President of the United States of America.
Vladimir Putin speaking through a translator, and on the campaign trail, Trump predicted he could end the Russia-Ukraine conflict the day after his election. But Zelensky warns that would be unacceptable and suicidal for Europe to ask Ukraine to make concessions to Russia in exchange for a potential peace deal. Trump has vowed to bring an end to the war, but he also threatened to cut off military and financial aid to Ukraine. Authorities in Amsterdam say anti-Semitic rioters have actively sought out Israeli supporters to attack and assault them after a soccer match. At least 5 people had to be hospitalized, more than 60 arrested in that violence, condemned by both Israel and the Netherlands. Israel says it's sending planes to the Dutch capital to fly the fans home. And Southern California firefighters are working to contain a fire that destroyed 132 structures in just 2 days. More than 14,000 people have been told to evacuate. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, and Lisa.
Amy, thanks so much. Out on YouTube, live chat. Join YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. A live chat can be really informative. Somebody's saying, how's the Tang Zero going this morning? I'm sorry. Mateo said mimosas in order. It's Friday. Mimosas here.
Of election week.
Tang mimosas are the way to go. Susie Wiles, you told me about her a year ago. Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff, Donald Trump announcing this yesterday. She has been side by side with him for many months now.
Does he listen to her?
Absolutely. And she doesn't talk much. I've had a conversation about this with Nancy Cook and others. You know, she is doing the work, guiding him as best she can, and she's not somebody to steal the spotlight from him. So she's a trusted advisor, and as I understand it, very close to his family as well. So a trusted person. And
but she's going to walk in the Oval Office and say, hey, stupid.
Maybe. I don't know how that'll go down. Maybe not in those words so much, but I think, look at the strategy. A lot of it was carved by her.
David Gura and Susie Wild. We'll have much more perspective on David Gura. Margaret Brennan joining later. We'll move forward. Red and green on the screen. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a mix of red and green on the screen, and this is the market gave back some of the gains after Donald Trump's presidential election sparked this risk-on frenzy. Right now, NASDAQ futures down 0.1%, 37 points. Dow futures, little change up about 25 points. S&P futures, little change down about a point. The two-year yield at 4.18%, that's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.30%, that's down 2 basis points. Few companies making news. BlackRock said to be in talks to take a minority stake in hedge fund giant Millennium Management, and Brazil courting a Chinese company to compete with Starlink internet service after a fight with Elon Musk over on X. And global food prices, well, they hit the highest level in 18 months in October. United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, they say its index of food commodity prices, it rose in October due to unfavorable weather, the biggest gain coming from vegetable oil. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thanks so much. The only reason we could get Gura to come in today is to pause here. We're going to play the Beach Boys. We got some Florida music for President-elect Trump here through the show today. Gura had a tantrum over bluegrass, and what I love here is the generational shift from Ben Eldridge of Seldom Seen over to Chris Eldridge. And you're listening right now to who? The Mighty Poplars?
Mighty Poplar, which is a super group. Chris Eldridge is in it, along with Greg Garrison, Alex Hargraves. It's a great band, a lot of great instrumental numbers on it, but some good singing as well. And it has that flavor that you're talking about that's kind of seeped through from the generation
It's
before.
gone the generation before, but am I right in that it's a little more jazz feel, sort of like Milk Carton Kids?
Yes. Well, bigger solos, more emphasis on the solos, and kind of more high art, I guess you could say.
Yeah, okay.
With that high lonesome sound built in.
Yeah, but it's something to calm people after the week, right?
Put it on your turntable. You have
Both
a turntable,
Republicans
don't you?
and Democrats.
Both Republicans and
No,
Democrats.
I don't. Do you? Wait a minute. Do you have a turntable?
I have a turntable, yeah.
Lisa, do you have a turntable?
I do not, no.
I do not either.
I'm not cool, because he's from Brooklyn, that's why.
I know. I'm in the timeout chair because you do vinyl.
I do. Well, I'm getting back into it. It was hard to get for a while, but you get the digital download thing with it. You can do both, but the presentation is beautiful. What I miss about music online is you don't have liner notes and you don't have the presentation of it.
Totally
and I do
agree.
like that with an LP. Seeing the cover art and reading about it.
People ask me what I use. I use Tidal exclusively because they got some better liner notes than the others. So that's that. You'll stay for the rest of the show now that we did Mighty Poplar.
Thank you.
Very good.
Agent's happy with that.
That's good.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily roundup on the front page is the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for your support. Lisa starts strong. What do you got?
All right, this is all about your favorite vehicle, the Cybertruck, okay? You could be seeing more of these on the road. There's a reason why. Tesla is offering the option to lease the all-wheel drive version of the electric pickup for 3 years. The price, it's going to be $999 a month. You also have to put down $7,500 on top of it. But if you want the 2-year version with zero down, if you want to go that way, you're still going to pay about $1,715 a month. So it's going to cost you.
It costs like $100,000.
It costs $100,000.
Have you been in one of these, Tom? Have you ridden in a Cybertruck?
No, Tucker had his on Madison Avenue. And I saw it. And to me, Ken, our global technical director, helped me. It's the width of the Cybertruck. It won't get in a parking spot. Is that right, Ken?
It takes up. I've seen them try.
Rich, wake up, Ken. Okay.
I've seen them try to pull in. It's ridiculous. I've seen.
I think
them.
it's the width is a real constraint.
It has some steering thing where you can maneuver it more easily, maybe into a.
Oh, you play
spot.
naive.
I don't know.
You got some guy next door.
I've heard that if it's that
one.
or a Rivian, the Rivian is more luxurious. Cybertruck doesn't have the level of luxury.
The Rivian impresses me.
Yeah.
It's like it looks like sort of Lincoln-ish.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Okay. Well, Tucker's looking at one right now.
we'll see. Maybe
Next.
Okay. The man behind the voice of the popular AOL email alert has passed away. You don't know his name, but you certainly know his voice.
You've got mail.
That is him. 1989, Elwood Edwards. He was paid $200 by an upstart called American Online, AOL, to say that famous line a lot more. He had a career in broadcasting. He started in AM radio, behind-the-scenes TV, but how he landed that gig, his wife actually worked as a customer service representative for Quantum Computer Services, which would become AOL, and they were looking for this voiceover, and she said, well, what about my husband? And they said, sure. And that's how it became.
And guess how much you got for that? How many dollars?
$200.
$200.
Yeah, I mean, I
my
look
daily
at
rate.
this,
My daily
to
rate
bring-
here on surveillance.
Yeah, to bring it to the election, plus Tang. To bring it to the election, we haven't had the articles yet, David Gura, of how technology, email, social media, all that.
This is an incredible segue, as you would say.
No, but it shifted
That's
the
very
election.
True. That's true.
And Mr. Trump said, "This is what happened last time. I'm going to be more technically savvy this time." Am I right?
Yes, and I saw a great piece over the last couple of days about how he embraced new media and podcasting in a way that felt very authentic. He was getting good guidance on that.
Why
Love
am
to have him here on the
Steve
show.
Colbert brought this up last night with John Dickerson of CBS, Margaret Brennan with us later. Why am I still getting emails from different people saying they need money?
I've noticed that too. Some Senate races still not decided.
You sure
Help
it's
out
nobody
here.
that you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you got next, Lisa?
Okay, do you ever wonder why sometimes you go and get the over-the-counter drug medicine and sometimes it doesn't work and you just feel like you're taking it and nothing is happening? There could be a reason for it. The FDA, it's proposed removing a certain ingredient that they say is not effective in cold medicine, oral phenylephrine, that's what it's called. It's safe, but they just say it doesn't work in relieving your stuffy nose. So the Wall Street Journal pointed this out a few weeks ago. They pointed this to some studies. So now the FDA is jumping on board. So that could mean versions of Benadryl, Mucinex, Tylenol, they could be coming off the shelves, and they just have to work around it or maybe come up with a new formula without that ingredient.
She picked this because you've been coughing so much.
See?
She's worried about you.
He doesn't go for the over-the-counter. He
No,
goes for the
everybody
real
at
deal.
home
Just a
uses this
Ricola.
stuff. Every vet bill's using the cough syrup. I mean, it's too. But to me, the big problem is now you go in the drugstores and you can't get at the stuff.
Oh,
it's all locked up.
locked up.
Yeah.
Even in your neighborhood?
Yeah, even in our neighborhood.
My word.
It's,
Order it online.
Yeah.
You can do that.
One more, Lisa.
All
What do
right,
you
so
got?
you know how we have the luxury of the coffee here.
Yes.
The Bloomberg, all different varieties. But at Intel, they had the luxury and they wanted to take it away. But now they say, you know what? We're going to bring it back because we want to improve morale. Intel has not been doing the best. You know, they've gone through a couple of struggles. They missed opportunities with AI. So now they want to bring that back to help with office morale. That's what these local reports are saying. What is not coming back, they used to get free fruit. So now that's not happening. So now they have to bring their own fruit if they want to do that. But also they're not going to be getting those reimbursements for internet, phone, commuting costs. And the company, said back in August that they're going to cut about 15,000 workers. So that was part of the cost cutting. But they said, you know what? We're keeping the coffee. Got to keep employees happy and caffeinated.
It's gonna be interesting. I mean, it's a real sea change. I mean, we're making jokes about it, folks, but Intel out of the Dow.
Oh yeah,
is
That's
like
a big deal.
Emotionally, it's a big deal. You move on, but Sherwin-Williams, like Good Morning Cleveland, I just don't get it. 20-some billion in revenue. It's teens weens. I mean, I'd love to know from the Dow Jones Industrial Average people how they picked Sherwin versus 30 other companies. You're bored by this.
Is it formulaic?
If
How
we're
do they
not
do it?
doing politics,
No,
you're
I'm
not
bored.
nodding off, falling
I'm
asleep.
just thinking about last time I've been to a Sherwin-Williams. Years ago, I probably have to paint. Probably have to do some painting in the
Probably have to do
kitchen,
some painting this weekend. Mrs. Gura will be
get the ladder out.
That is well. We're doing Florida music this morning, and it's good. I mean, we're trying to get Gura down to Mar-a-Lago for an interview. Thank you, Lisa, for the newspapers. Greatly appreciate that. This morning, have some mimosa.
We've poured some phenylephrine in Tom's coffee.
We're
See
trying,
if it has any
to
effect.
get you down to Mar-a-Lago to do an interview, so we got to go with the Florida music. And, you got to start with, like Mar-a-Lago. It's a utopian island off the Florida Keys.
All right.
That's how you come up with this with John Phillips and Mike Love, and they made the song like 40 years ago. It's the Beach Boys. And, Mr. Trump must be celebrating. I mean, it's huge. We haven't seen much of him.
No, he's picking his cabinet. Got his chief of staff, as we said, now he's got to figure out who's on the cabinet.
Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, and the rest of it. Hopefully, Mr. Trump will be listening.
Ambassador to Kokomo.
To the Beach Boys. Yeah, that's what I'm going for.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Mr. Barr on assignment, Amy Morris in Washington, D.C., sleepless in Washington, holding court, giving you the complete news of the morning. David Gura in for Paul Sweeney, which is good. We're talking about the politics of the moment, Mr. Gura's experiences from the blue wall of Wisconsin down to Philadelphia. And did you see the Flyers play?
Didn't see the Flyers play.
I thought
I should have.
Hockey.
You were going to leave me some tickets, but they didn't have them at the desk.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Anyways, David Gura is here. There's lots to talk about. We welcome all of you across the nation. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, the 12 people in the country that didn't vote. Good morning to you. Is red and green on the screen. We'll get to Lisa this morning with a data check. SPX futures, are you ready, folks? Futures trade higher than the index. S&P futures right now, 6,001. Never across all of 2024 did I think I would ever say that. SPX 6,001. Those are the futures trading right now. Bloomberg surveillance this morning on your morning commute. We're brought to you by Cohn-Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Is your business future ready? Talk to Cohn-Resnick's digital advisory team about strategies and platforms to drive competitive advantage. We're out on YouTube. Thanks for the live chat this morning. Smart. Somebody mentioned Eastman Kodak Company. Open me first. Thank you for
You're
that.
familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Anyways, out on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Thank you for that. Also, on your morning commute, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning. I was in a car yesterday. Bentley was in the garage. I was in a car yesterday with Apple CarPlay. There was Bloomberg Radio right in the guy's, right in the guy's iPad-y kind of.
Had it ready.
Had it ready to go. It was right next to the Bluegrass station.
I've enjoyed your grousing about getting an Uber in the morning. Is it getting better? Are you able to get one?
It's a little bit better, but twice this week it was like, you're kidding me. I mean, you guys, there's a lot of people coming and going. They all think I'm coming from, some all-night party.
I see. No, not
They don't
the
think
case.
I'm going to work.
Right.
But, I mean, it's the way it is.
He's
Anyways,
coming
on your
from a
morning
night
commute,
rave.
The
good morning.
secret life of Tom.
Thank you. You got mail. Lisa mentioned you got mail. Trust me, folks. We're sleepless in the radio studio this morning. She's wide awake from the Interactive Broker Studios. A data check. Lisa Mateo.
Yes, and red and green on the screen after another record close on Wall Street. NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 42 points. We have Dow futures little change up 27 points. S&P futures down about a point right now. Want to go to currencies? We have the dollar right now edging just a bit higher. Chinese yuan, that's what I want to point to. It's weaker, down about 0.4%. This is after China announced $1.4 trillion program to allow local governments to refinance debt. I want to check in with U.S. listed shares of companies like Alibaba, down more than 3%. Bond yields, commodities also falling. We have the 2-year yield 4.19%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.29%, and that's down 2 basis points. To earnings, Paramount. Overall sales, they were weaker than expected. Declines in TV and film revenue, but reported big gains in streaming subscribers. Shares are up about 1%. And two of the largest online reservation companies, strong outlooks. We're talking about Expedia and Airbnb. Expedia up 3%, but Airbnb down 6%. Analysts, they just like the results, but they did flag the impact of investments on margins. And finally, Rivian, still on track to report its first ever gross profit by year's end, despite a parts shortage. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thank you so much, Elisa. I appreciate it now. On fixed income and on the pricing, as we go into a Trump administration, Chanel Desai joins us right now with Franklin Templeton. Chanel, what changes with this election? How do you shift, given nominal GDP, given any potential stimulus, fiscal debt and deficit? What is the Franklin Templeton shift?
So, Tom, first of all, thanks for having me on, but we were actually prepared to some extent, not for this particular outcome, but the reality that both candidates were completely fiscally profligate. There is no other word for it. Because certainly Trump's plans are far more expansionary, but the Democrat plans were already very expansionary in the sense that in any other environment with an economic backdrop of the variety that we have, to even discuss $3.5 trillion in deficit expansion, it would seem crazy, especially at the levels that we have currently on the deficit and the outlook. Sorry, go ahead.
No, are you going to take a coupon, or are you trading for total return? I mean, are you trading with a vector towards lower yield, higher prices?
Basically, I'd say that we will be, I think, in fixed income in a coupon market for a while. It's a carry market, in part because I do think on balance, yes, we've seen a sell-off in yields, but keep in mind, we still don't know what will be executable because we don't have the House results yet. After that, we don't know to what extent the House and the Senate will be wary of the kind of expansion which some of the plans which were discussed on the campaign trail entail.
I can't
but
say
in any state of the world, you will see a fiscal deficit expansion. And as such, once that becomes concretized, I think Treasury yields drift higher. I don't see a catalyst significant reduction.
I can't convey enough, David, how important what Dr. Desai just said. The idea of clipping a coupon versus total return is foreign to most investors. They're addicted to the value add of total return of the coupon and a capital gain on top of it. And you're not hearing that from Dr. Desai.
When you, I really
go
don't
ahead,
that.
Jump in. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just jumping in because I was just going to say that even if we step aside from treasuries and we look at spread markets, whether you're looking at investment grade or high yield, spreads are tight. And that is reasonable from a risk assessment perspective. We're looking at an economy which is probably on balance, at least for the first few years. We're going to see expansionary fiscal policy that's going to be supported. So you don't have a backdrop where the corporate fundamentals are going to immediately deteriorate. But equally, spreads are already so tight that I don't see how much additional tightening we can see, even in other segments of the market outside treasuries. We need to see, it goes back to the fact that I think fixed income returns to something we haven't been used to. It does what it says on the can. It provides income. Let's be happy with that.
When you look at the long end of the yield curve and think about the fiscal profligacy, as you put it, do you have any optimism that there will be a more honest conversation about that going forward here? We're talking about the House of Representatives not being settled yet. We kind of ahead of the election talked about both parties' plans and what they would add to the deficit. Is there any forcing mechanism for them to talk about this in the near term, or is it just a foregone conclusion that's just going to keep building?
I would love it to be the case that there was a discussion in the near term. I don't think that yields between 4.5 and 5 are going to bring people to the table, because the reality is both sides need to acknowledge that the US needs to do something about expenditures, whether you call them tax expenditures and of course revenues. But I would note over the last several years, revenues have not collapsed, but expenditures have gone up a lot. And so we do need to do something here. We need some fundamental reform of mandatory programs. I'm not sure, unfortunately, we're at that point yet. I do think that if I look over the medium term, over the next 4 or 5 years, we will get to that point. You know, the famous moment which forced Republicans and Democrats together last time was, I guess, during Bill Clinton.
Chanel, we got to leave it there.
I'm not sure near term that happens.
Got to go to news. Chanel Desai, thank you so much with Franklin Templeton this morning. Right to it, red and green on the screen with our news in Washington. Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Tom. President-elect Donald Trump named Susie Wiles as his White House chief of staff. She's a veteran Republican political operative who helped Trump navigate his presidential campaign, and she will be the first ever woman to serve as White House chief of staff. Now, one of Trump's most highly anticipated cabinet picks will be Treasury Secretary. More on that with Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries.
There's a lot of names out there that'll be familiar to people. Scott Bessent of Key Square Capital Management. He has been a big advocate for Trump on the campaign trail, a big fundraiser, and a big critic of current Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. But there's also people like Jay Clayton, who was Trump's SEC chair. There's Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty and former U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer. John Paulson is out there. So it's a huge number of names. I should also mention Cantor Fitzgerald's Howard Lutnick.
Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries notes Trump's first Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was one of the few in his cabinet who served out the full term. European Union leaders are trying to work out whether they can keep the Ukrainian war effort going if Donald Trump decides to shut off support from the U.S. House control remains in the air. 25 races are still uncalled. Republicans show leads for now in enough House races to take a narrow majority. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is coming under mounting pressure to agree to an early election in January, with a new poll showing 2/3 of voters want a national ballot as soon as possible. Business groups are calling for an end to political turmoil. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, and
Amy,
Lisa.
thanks so much. Greatly appreciated this morning. Yesterday in the early hours, the sleepless hours, I'm going to say 4 a.m. plus or minus an hour, John Byrne Murdoch over at the FT put out a story that I immediately advanced out on Twitter and LinkedIn with some really trenchant charts. And it got a lot of play. Justin Wolfers over in Michigan picked up on it, and many, many others, with some really important stuff about the global impact, some of the incumbent challenges of the moment. Down below David Gura, John Burns Murdoch has a combination a la Okun's Law, which is inflation and net migration into a country. And it is absolutely, it's worse in Australia, it's worse in the UK, it's worse in Portugal, but nevertheless, U.S. is part of that. Give us an update on the analysis of immigration in this election.
You know, this was an issue that Republicans made hay out of. Donald Trump made hay out of it as well, and sort of misdescribed what Kamala Harris's role was in this administration when it came to immigration. But it was something that was clearly very salient, very important to a lot of voters. And I think that the piece that you flagged is so good in part because it just highlights what we've heard from our colleague Lena Laurent in Paris. We've heard from Stephanie Flanders on her writing in her show, her podcast as well, just about how difficult this environment has been for incumbents all over the world, in France and Great Britain and Japan. We see this kind of theme continuing here with the United States, and this is something we haven't seen in about probably a century's time.
An unfair question, but I'm going to go with it because you're so read in. Can he fix the border by executive order, or does he have to find a common ground with, say, House Judiciary, Senate Judiciary? Does he need Jim Jordan and his company to come on board, or can he just do it off the desk of the Oval Office?
A president has the ability to do a lot if he declares some kind of national emergency. So that's true of trade policy with tariffs, as you were talking about yesterday with Paul. I think the same goes here. We would enjoy and appreciate the support of the legislature. But again, a president, if he declares a national emergency, usually has wider powers than he might otherwise have. And your question, can he fix it? I think that's up to debate. Can he do something or more about the border? Indeed, he can.
Joe Biden is lame duck. What's the character of his lamed duck?
That's a great question. I listened and watched his speech yesterday as he kind of contemplated his own legacy, placed himself in history. He had goals for what he wanted to accomplish here by the end of his term. He's got 70-plus days to do it. The big one was bringing some semblance of peace to the Middle East. He's made very little progress on that so far. So we'll see if he's able to do anything here in the coming months, but the time draws near.
David Gura with us, and of course the big take, Mr. Gura will be working on a cinematic edition here this Friday. Good morning from New York.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures are mixed following the Fed's unanimous decision to cut rates by a quarter point. Moving forward, Chair Jay Powell said he doesn't rule out or in a December rate cut. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 50 points. Dow futures, little changed, up 4 points. S&P futures, little change, down about 3 points. Side note, NVIDIA, Sherwin-Williams joining the Dow today, replacing Intel and Dow Inc. We have the 2-year yield, 4.19%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%, and that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude, $74 a barrel. WTI crude down more than 1.5% at $71 a barrel. We have spot gold about 0.5% lower, $2,691 an ounce. Shares of Boston-based DraftKings down 4%, cut its full-year estimate for 2024 revenue and for profit. Sony ADRs up 7%. The company raised revenue outlook after the PlayStation sales beat, and shares of Pinterest. They're down 13% after a weak holiday outlook. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. David Gura in for Paul Sweeney. I'm Tom Keene. Thank you for joining us. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. It's growing. This week has been especially strong. Thank you for the pro and con comments. We've gotten some real hate mail in the political coverage. People want us to just stick with NVIDIA and Sherwin-Williams.
I see, yes.
But there's a huge demand for us to synthesize in economics, finance, investment with the world of David Gura.
You had my old friend Christina Greer on yesterday.
She was great,
Brooklyn
on
neighbor.
fire.
Yeah,
got some
very
really
good. On the Democratic Party.
We got some really constructive comments from Trump supporters that we need to be balanced, to have someone on the left from Fordham. I thought Professor Greer was outstanding. And, we're efforting people, of course, in celebration of President-elect Trump's victory. That's what we do here. We look at all different opinions. I'm still getting over Truman and Dewey, a few years ago. Joining us now to move forward on a greater thinking, particularly in foreign exchange and this question of the dollar, Schuyler Montgomery-Connick joins us, foreign exchange strategist at Barclays. Schuyler, let me just cut to the chase. Donald Trump, the third day he's elected, is going to sit there and say he's going to be in a gaggle outside the helicopter like he does. He's going to start screaming, I need a weak dollar. How does President-elect Trump get his wanted weak dollar?
Yeah, I mean, this is the issue, right? It's how does it actually happen? There are kind of 4 policy ways that you can make it happen. But to us, the kind of bar or the cost of all of them means that it's very unlikely. So those 4 things are fiscal. I think we know very well that he's pro-fiscal, so that seems politically unwanted to have a tighter fiscal policy in order to weaken the dollar. The second is monetary policy. Putting aside the fact that there are institutional checks that make that harder, I think it's also important to note that when you have unnecessarily loose monetary policy, that's inflationary. Again, that's not politically popular. You could do direct intervention, but multilateral intervention, it seems unlikely, given that a lot of the dollar counterparts think euro, think CNY, are unlikely to want that, given it weakens their exports. And then finally, you can do unilateral intervention, but if that was sterilized, it would probably require a treasury selling, and that would mean higher yields. So all of it is quite hard in terms of being a high cost.
David, Schuyler's new. She doesn't understand that on Fridays we don't do sterilized and unsterilized intervention dynamics on surveillance. We say that for Tuesday, folks.
She doesn't believe the Plaza Accords will give way to the Trump Hotel Accords.
No, but there's a lot of hope. This is a really important insight, David Gura. We're miles away from the dollar strength extended that led to Plaza and Louvre. There's this hope. Let's all get together, at St. Andrews with Schuyler and have a G7 meeting to weaken the dollar. We're nowhere near that. Pick it up.
I'll pick it up from there. Can I ask you about China and what we've seen overnight and in these last few weeks? We've seen the government kind of scrambling, coming out with these vast stimulus measures, both fiscal and monetary. New news out this morning. $1.4 trillion worth of efforts here to resolve its local government debt crisis. How is that playing out? How are you viewing that from your perspective, your vantage, looking at currency, what the Chinese government has been doing today and over these last few weeks?
Yeah, I think it's attempting to send a strong signal. I think there's clearly been a shift in tone where they see economic growth as more concerning. But the size of the stimulus matters, but also over how many years and to what programs. As it stands, quite a lot of the stimulus is being used to pay off debt or reduce debt servicing costs. That implies preventing downside rather than stimulating the economy. Then there's the issue of how it feeds into the economy. So most of the stimulus that's been announced, it's directed to plans that have already existed and didn't work. And the issue is that you need to do something to change consumer behavior. The property sector is in a multi-year contraction. Youth unemployment is very high. And as a result, consumers have pulled back on spending to save. So that stimulus is like pushing on a string. Exports in the manufacturing sector are the one kind of success story of recent years. But this is now under threat from possible U.S. tariffs. So for us, it's not enough to really see CNY strength. And the fact that you have a Donald Trump presidency on the other side means the outlook's not very positive for CNY.
Schuyler, Tom's making light of Trump out by the helicopter, yelling out over the din of the blades to the reporters who are gathered there. But I do want to get your counsel on how you think about your framework of analysis going into the second administration, bearing in mind what we learned over the last time he was in the White House. Nobody can jawbone the way that he can jawbone, for better or worse. How do you process that? What weight do you give it? And if to extrapolate even more, if I'm in Beijing, if I'm a government official, how much am I listening to what he's saying? How much of an effect does that have on currency?
I mean, absolutely has a big impact. I think we need to divide into what can be done solely by Trump as well as what can be done when he has a red sweep. But on tariffs alone, we've modeled the impact from the import substitution channel. And if you assume 60% tariff on China, which is in line with the rhetoric, and a 70% probability of a 10% tariff on other countries with the US or has a large trade surplus with the US, then you get very significant dollar upside of up to 7%. And that feeds into kind of levels in euro dollar around 103. So that's a lot just on tariffs alone. Then you add on top of that the possibility for fiscal, that adds even more. Then you add on top of that any kind of policies that are inflationary and feed into tighter monetary policy. That also is positive for the dollar. And so I think you need to take these things very seriously and then, originally look at the tariff impact and from there divide based off of what you think is feasible for the House.
I'm sure you watched Jerome Powell yesterday. Boy, was he emphatic late in the press conference.
Nobody says no as unequivocally as well, I guess you're the only one who would say more unequivocally than he did, Tom.
It was the way he said it.
Yeah,
and
very
forceful. It was really, really different, particularly with, I quoted Harry Truman there, talking about lecturing the chairman of the Fed in 1950 about Stalin. I mean, this is not new, folks. Skylar, Barclay's treatment of the independence of the Federal Reserve System.
I mean, I think you absolutely have to acknowledge that it's independent. Fed Chair Powell was very clear that he's not stepping down before his term. And so that means we're looking at 2026 in terms of a chair change and any kind of change in terms of how that feeds through to monetary policy. So take it very seriously and absolutely also think that, central banks can't change their policy to prospective fiscal stimulus or prospective policy plans. They only change when you actually have them enacted or know that they will be enacted.
Skylar, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. With Barclays foreign exchange strategist Skylar Montgomery Koenig as well. I go into the news dump on Google and I'm looking for like the latest on the House. Good morning, KCCI Channel 8.
Okay.
Des Moines.
All right.
They've got the best summary. It's at 7 minutes ago here is well. And I'm looking here, David, for a district that's really key. Do you have a district you're following right now in California or Arizona? Names we don't know?
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed to say so. But I do just want to emphasize again how crucial this is for Democrats to get control. I mean, they're hoping and praying that this is going to fall in their favor, and it sounds like from our conversation with Jessica Taylor a little earlier back, odds are looking scant.
Yeah, scant.
Yeah, I think that's a technical term.
That's right. And what's interesting here, I'm getting out 1,040 whatever days it is. 2028 doesn't get you to the census of 2030.
That's true. Very true.
So the math is sort of the same for the Republicans. There won't. Am I right that there won't be the redistricting frenzy next time around?
Likely not. And then you have a new anti-incumbent fervor, perhaps. It's always tough to be the incumbent.
Are you on Team 2028? Do you have a meeting at 11 a.m. this morning?
Check my
planning
calendar.
for
Check
the
that
2028 election? David Gura with us today. Amy Morris as well. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, pointing to a subdued end to a big week. The S&P 500 Dow Industrials still on track to deliver their best weekly performances in a year. We'll get to NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 43 points. Dow futures, little changed, up 28 points. S&P futures, little changed. We head to the two-year yield, 4.20%. That's little changed. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%, and that's down 1 basis point. On the economic calendar for today, we have a read on sentiment from the University of Michigan. A few companies making news. The Information's reporting that Amazon weighing a second multi-billion-dollar investment in OpenAI rival Anthropic. Then the Biden administration racing to compete CHIPS Act subsidy deals with Intel, Samsung, and others before Donald Trump takes office. And finally, Boeing CEO trying to mend some relations with workers after the strike. Kelly Ortberg has said that furloughed workers will be paid for lost time. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate that. Economic indicators through the week into the month of November, December, the end of the year, always brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors. They are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn more. We got a poll out. I want to go over this right now here at the center tendency of the show on a Friday. We had a meeting, one of our 3 a.m. meetings. It's Zoom. It's like 42 people on it, David. I know
nobody
you've
tells
never
me
been
about
at that
these.
early
Yeah.
Zoom meeting. Okay. And we really decided we wanted to hear what you think about Bloomberg Radio. There is a poll, and we need you to take this. How do you get there? YouTube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Go to YouTube. Go to Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to the show. Please do that. But we need you to click on the survey to tell us how much you love Lisa Mateo and how much you dislike me. I mean, it's questions like that. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Don't
here.
Prejudice the survey respondents.
I would not want to do that. We thank our partners, Material, for helping out as well. Of course, again, go to the survey, youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. We're getting a big response to it. People like, where can we find it? Where can we find it? YouTube, Bloomberg Podcast. So we had to pick up the pieces after the election. And Friday, we're sort of contemplating into the weekend. There's no one better to do that with than Mike Green. Mike Green joins us right now with all of his perspective as well, Chief Investment Strategist, Simplify Asset Management. What are you saying to your managers? What are you saying to your clients? What's the Mike Green theme as we stagger into December?
Well, we seem to be far from staggering, but the key theme that I keep emphasizing for people is what's referred to as the growing inelasticity in markets. The responsiveness to a dollar into the market or a dollar out is changing before our eyes. And so, when I think about what is actually happening, what we saw occur in response to the Trump election, one of your colleagues, Eric Balkunas, came out in the morning and said it was a flow-mageddon, right? There was an extraordinary amount of flow. Mm-hmm. U.S. equity markets added roughly $1.3 trillion in market cap. And Eric's analysis is similar to mine, that about $30 billion went into the markets.
I look at this, and Mike, Rick Reeder was on our Fed Decide show yesterday, and of course, John's asking him responsible questions, and Bramo's asking him responsible questions. So I go, hey, Rick, how about that Bitcoin? Because BlackRock has such a large exposure there. Bitcoin to 76,000. What does it signal to you?
It signals that inelasticity. So if you go back to January of this year, we had the launch of the Bitcoin ETFs. Those have now taken in across all the different asset classes about 1.2 million Bitcoin. So somewhere around 7% of all the possible Bitcoin that is outstanding or could be outstanding under the formulaic approach to it. The amazing thing is this now defines the market. About 85% of the price action of Bitcoin can be determined by those flows. So in any 30-day period, simply by looking at the quantity of flows that are going into these ETFs, we can explain about 85% of the price movement. The other staggering statistic here is that if you look at how many dollars have to flow into these ETFs at the current price of Bitcoin just to maintain it, it's about $1 billion a month that has to go into these ETFs just to keep Bitcoin constant. right? Now, this has all sorts of perverse components and again highlights this inelasticity that I'm referring to. One of the most obvious examples around that is MicroStrategy, the Michael Saylor vehicle that has transitioned from being a SaaS software service into a Bitcoin holding mechanism.
And Rick said that, David Gura. Rick Reeder's talking to me saying BitDog's an asset class. I mean, I quoted the Doge 2 days ago.
You did?
For the first
On
time
air?
ever. Yeah.
In a market check.
XDG.
XDG.
Nailed that.
Let me, you invoked Eric's, and Eric has such a great perspective on so many different
He's
assets.
okay.
So she's okay, says Tom. When you looked at the flows after election day, did anything surprise you about where people were putting their money?
It honestly did not surprise me. So what we expected to see was money flow into small caps. If you look at the shares outstanding on the most common trading ETF for small caps, the IWM, that exploded. It rose about 5.7% in terms of the quantity of shares outstanding in a single day. The interesting thing to me, actually, is that lagged the numbers that we saw at the June 30th turn date, where basically everybody decided we were going to start preparing for the election, we're going to start preparing ourselves for a soft landing, et cetera. We saw a much more dramatic response in terms of small caps on that date, tied to more money going in. So I actually think it's really interesting that we're seeing about what I would refer to as a dampened response. People are kind of fully positioned is what I would highlight.
Can I ask you about gold and the way that it's behaved since the election? I mean, kind of surprisingly, it was down after this surge going into the election, and here we are just talking about this morning so much about all that's likely to be inflationary going into this second Trump term. What do you make of that move? And I guess maybe can you compare that with what we're seeing in Bitcoin, sort of that divergence that we're seeing in those two assets?
Yeah, I mean, to me, gold is all about China, right? So with the U.S. having announced sanctions on Russia and taking the reserves of Russia or preventing their use from them, like we can talk about whether we quote unquote stole them or not, but the simple reality is from the leadership of Russia's standpoint, we're not giving it back until we reach some form of rapprochement, right? So from their standpoint, we stole it. That changed the world format and created a condition under which countries like China, which is running a plus $1 trillion trade surplus with the rest of the world, can't hold their dollars in those surplus dollars that are created in treasuries. They're choosing alternative assets like gold or investments in factories in places like Mexico.
And help me with the shock Republicans and Democrats have over David Gura's world, the three houses. Maybe it'll be a suite, maybe it won't be. Does it change an investment perspective? I brought this up many times, where you get a Trump oomph, a growthiness, as Steve Colbert would say. You get a nominal GDP pop. Whether it's inflation or GDP, our listeners have to participate in the Trump celebration.
Well, they certainly have to chase the underlying behavior, right? It's very difficult for somebody to present a contrarian thesis that says, I think stocks are fully valued, right? Now, I will tell you, ironically, we've had a number of indicators that suggest the market is beginning to flag, and some of this could be a pause, this could be a continuation. We have no way of knowing that. Your own Anna Wong at Bloomberg, I think, has done some of the best work around this.
It's scary good.
Which is just outstanding in terms of what is the impact of the tariffs? Do we actually expect the tariffs to be implemented, or are they negotiating tools? And that's really what it boils down to, right? If I look at what Trump is proposing, it is an extension of tax cuts, not necessarily new tax cuts. The path to getting there is going to involve a potential government shutdown, right? These are all contractionary components. And then when I start talking about tariffs, the focus is very much on the increase in prices that American households may be forced to pay. But one, they don't have the income to pay that, so it means they're going to be spending less. And secondly, when you actually institute tariffs, which are a tax, just not a sales tax, as described by the Harris campaign, when you introduce those, you are talking about cutting incomes in the rest of the world. Right? And so I really struggle with how inflationary these tariffs are. Will prices go up for products that don't have substitutes from places like China where the tariffs are increased? Of course they will. Does that translate to much higher nominal GDP growth? I'm really skeptical. I mean, again, remember Smoot-Hawley, right? When we went to tariff levels like this in the past, what happened? A global-wide contraction in income.
Can we avoid Smoot-Hawley if we migrate and learn into tariffs rather than a Trumpian magnitude of 20% or whatever?
So I think that's going to be the real question, right? And you use the phrase Trumpian as a adjective, which I think is actually quite interesting, right? When we think about what he has actually said, I'm announcing these, and then I'm going to use that for negotiation purposes. If you fail to come to the table, you will pay 20% tariff, et cetera. The key difference in the 1930s was the U.S. was the China of the world at that point. We were the global exporter. And so when we shut down trade by causing a reactionary function, that ultimately ended up impacting our incomes as well as everyone else's. This time around, we're the world customer, right? We buy the product from the rest of the world. And it's really interesting when you think about tariffs in that context, because you're simply saying, we're going to start negotiating.
I see.
Thank you. Mike agreed. Thank you so much for Simplify. Greatly appreciated this morning. Lots going on here. Mike Green again is Simplify Asset Management. Red and green on the screen. The VIX under 15. Good morning, Dean Kernett on that call. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Tom. Senate Republicans, South Dakota's John Thune, Texas's John Cornyn, and Florida's Rick Scott are all vying to be the next Senate Majority Leader. They're looking to replace Kentucky Republican Mitch McConnell, who is stepping aside. Leaders of Israel and the Netherlands are condemning what they called anti-Semitic attacks on fans of soccer club Maccabi Tel Aviv before and after a Europa League soccer match. The mayor of Amsterdam says they did not know of any concrete threat before the match. The violence erupted despite a ban on a pro-Palestinian demonstration near the stadium. Details were unclear, but Israel has ordered 2 planes sent to the Dutch capital to bring those Israelis home. A rapidly growing brush fire in the Los Angeles area burned out of control, destroying homes and triggering evacuations northwest of Malibu. Ventura County Sheriff Jim Fryhoff.
To date, we've evacuated over 400 homes, 250 residents choosing to stay and protect their homes, and there were 800 homes that no one was home, so assuming they had either left before we arrived, were at work, or otherwise out of town.
Hundreds of firefighters are fighting that blaze with more than 14,000 evacuation notices been sent. The FBI says it's in touch with the Justice Department over racist text messages sent to Black Americans across the country in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Nevada, South Carolina, Alabama, and several other states. The texts were sent anonymously, and a Detroit resident named Renee received one of them.
A plantation, to send us back to a plantation. It's uncalled for.
Multiple outlets reporting some of those texts were sent to voicemail that did identify them as users of Text Now, and that service says it shut down the accounts as soon as it became aware of what it was doing. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, and Lisa.
Amy, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning were brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insight can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. Thank you, BNY, for your support. David, what are you looking at? In the David Gura blur of 42 newspapers, you're on the phone. We're on breaks. Lisa's doing the news. You're on the phone talking with the animals inside the Beltway. What are you looking at this morning?
You know, I'm part of that game of trying to figure out what the Democrats think went wrong versus what went wrong and how they pick up the pieces from there. We were talking about Christina Greer being here yesterday and her suggestion that Pete Buttigieg could be the head of the party going forward here and what that might mean.
Yeah.
I am interested in that. Again, how they pick up the pieces and who's going to kind of carry the torch forward. And, you know, the postmortem has just begun here, and I think it'll begin in earnest after the House races are called.
So I got a beverage of choice in my hand last night. I can't remember, Lisa, if it was a 1 or the 2 or the 3.
It was chamomile or mint tea. What did we have?
I turned to Mrs. Keene.
Yes.
And I said, Dick Nixon,
okay,
governor of California. She didn't even know. I mean, come on. Can we set up Vice President Harris?
What happens to her
Restoring as governor of California. They do say Gavin Newsom goes off to Hollywood to, you know.
I saw that floated as something she might do. I mean, she's in a very interesting position here because what does she do after this? Does she go run for the Senate again? Governor is something she could do. She's not going to go. She'll write a book. I think that's guaranteed. She'll write another book.
Speaking to her.
Yeah.
You know.
Guest on surveillance, perhaps.
We'll get her out there. We'll effort her.
Effort her.
Matt Shirley's in charge of that.
Excellent.
You know, he's
yes,
Tom, you
down
can't
in
talk
D.C.
to him, you know, very good. Stay with us, folks. It's Friday. Bloomberg's Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen as the market kind of gave back some of those gains after Donald Trump's presidential election sparked that risk-on frenzy. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 53 points. Dow futures little changed, up 15 points. S&P futures a little change, down about 3. We have the 2-year yield at 4.22%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.32%, and that is little changed. To commodities, we have Brent crude, $74 a barrel. At WTI crude, down about 1.5% at $71 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,695 an ounce. Shares of Icahn Enterprises down 10%. Sources say it plans to half its dividend to buy a bigger stake in CVR Energy. Shares of CVR Energy up about 6%. And shares of Bloomin' Brands, the operator of Outback Steakhouse, down 10%. It cut its annual profit outlook. And finally, a question for whiskey bourbon lovers. How much would you pay for a Manhattan? The Wall Street Journal says a bar in Chicago is charging $16 more to use Russell's Reserve bourbon. It brings the price of the drink to $31. I don't know. I'm going to make it at home. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
We now go to surveillance bourbon correspondent David Gura here. Is it a racket, David? Seriously, all the bourbon craft.
It's quite a craze.
Come on, it used to be simple. Do you want Jack Daniels
Woodford,
or
Woodford Reserve? I don't think you have to go.
Is that what you do?
Yeah.
Oh, see,
you're not a whiskey drinker yourself, are you?
A little bit. My father was. A little bit less, but there's one I have from Washington State.
Oh, wow.
And it's really, it's lighter. Mm-hmm. Although, Mrs. Keene turned to me last night. She said, "Can you make me a Manhattan?"
Oh, wow.
Oh, my favorite.
And I make her a light one.
You had the cherries at the ready?
We get the fancy cherries.
Yeah.
We don't get
not just the maraschino, not the bright red.
Oh, no.
5-alarm. Yeah.
We give them the dogs. They like them, anyways.
Liquored up dogs.
How much for a Manhattan?
$31.
Wow.
I don't know. I just make it at home. That's all I do.
Okay. Thank you for our bourbon report this one.
Jeffrey Who sponsors that one? I don't know.
Sponsored by Payton and Rigel. Thank you so much. Joining us now, and this is seriously, folks, after the week we've all had, whatever your persuasion, to have Jeffrey Cleveland on now with his optimism about the American experiment on the left coast with Payton and Rigel. We're thrilled to have him on. Jeffrey Cleveland, do you adjust your economic outlook over the political events of the week?
I do not, Tom. I stand optimistic, and that has not changed after Tuesday night or Wednesday morning or whatever you pick. I think, Chair Powell, he had that great quote yesterday. He said, "We don't guess, we don't speculate, we don't presume about policy changes that are going to come down the pipe." And meanwhile, investors, that's all they do is guess, presume, and speculate. But I don't think you should alter your economic outlook based on this week. And we still see the most likely scenario, Tom, is a soft landing, which is continued growth and core PCE continuing to moderate out into the middle of next year. So that's still a great story.
Let's talk about the framework that bolsters your optimism. Maybe we can do the counterfactuals. What is worrying people? What could complicate Fed Chair Jerome Powell's job here going forward? Not to say that you have to believe that it would happen, but what might he be worried about, he and his colleagues?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm on the road right now. I'm traveling, visiting clients, and the main concern is that a more aggressive fiscal policy will cause inflation, and that should require higher bond yields. That's the main story that we have been talking a lot about. I think, Chair Powell's advice is a good one. You have to wait to see what the exact details of that policy will be. Our Payton and Regal's chart of the week this week will put in context, Trump 1.0, the tax and fiscal policies that he implemented in that first go around pale in comparison to anything we saw in COVID, the fiscal boost there. And that was the fiscal boost that really caused inflation. So I think maybe investors are just mixing up the magnitudes here. And so that's why there's this fear about fiscal policy boosting inflation. In terms of underlying our optimism, I think you have to go and look at the consumer. Consumer income in aggregate continues to grow at a 5% nominal clip. And that really is the basis for our optimism, because if the consumer, the American consumer, if they have income, they will spend it on bourbon. No. They will spend it on retail sales and spending the like, and GDP will continue to grow.
Jeffrey, what did we hear? I was traveling, so I didn't hear the press conference in its entirety, but what did we hear about the Fed's balance sheet, and how does the election that we enjoyed over the course of this last week complicate the Fed's thinking about how it's unwinding that balance sheet? Again, we've talked about the prospect for there being a more inflationary environment, the political pressure that might be exerted on the Fed chair and his colleagues. What about the balance sheet and the plans that we've seen unveiled and underway to unwind that?
Yeah, the shrinking of the balance sheet, the so-called quantitative tightening, QT, that will continue for the time being. They might get to a point where they slow the pace of that, and then I think ultimately halt QT. Probably, though, that's sometime the middle of next year, maybe Q2 or Q3. The reason why, what's behind our thinking? Well, we're just looking at the supply of reserves in the banking system, which we think are still abundant. You've got more than $3 trillion, so we don't see a scarcity there. And then Payton & Regal was born in the short-term markets, the front-end markets, so repo and CP and T-bills and the like. So we spent a lot of time looking at the demand for overnight funding, demand for reserves, for example. And except for at quarter end, where we saw a little bit of a pickup in demand for reserves, we don't really see what we saw in 2019.
Jeffrey Cleveland, off your remit, but I'm going to go there because you're good at this. We have a Levi's heir, Daniel Lurie, taking the mayorship of San Francisco. I looked at a map today of California election ago versus California of November 5th, 2024. Can you envision the political change as witnessed by the new mayor of San Francisco that leads to a more conservative California?
Well, Tom, I think we learned in the last couple of years, consumers, even in California, we hate inflation. That is a big takeaway from talking to friends and family members and clients and colleagues. So I think that tilted some of the political scale a little bit. And I do see an issue here. We're talking a lot more about businesses, whether businesses are leaving California, and maybe how businesses are treated in California. So there's just more of awareness and a discussion around that. So maybe we are seeing a shift underway from the left coast to maybe a little bit more toward the right. We'll have to see, Tom.
Interesting. Jeffrey Cleveland, thank you so much, with Payton Regal out in L.A. Love to have him on. I get the perspective. We say good morning to all of you.
I feel more optimistic.
Yeah.
Having heard that.
He's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 5:45 in the morning. He swims to Catalina Island when he's done with us. I mean, it's amazing. We say good morning to all of you on your commute across the nation. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning on Sirius XM. I got lectured.
Yeah.
The business people, management.
Yep.
They take me in a room. I'm always nervous. They take me in the room, sit me down. I don't even know their names.
Okay,
some of them.
Maybe for the better.
And they go, Tom, you're ignoring Sirius XM channel 123.
Yeah. Heard across the country.
Okay. And it's a ginormous.
Yes.
I mean, they're like, one of them, he's got an MBA he's a Baker scholar at Harvard. Mm-hmm. He's a ginormous. I mean, it's an MBA world. So good morning on Sirius XM.
I had a rental car in Philly and had it on.
Did you?
I was able to hear
we got
you
up
and
to
Paul
43,
yesterday. Yeah.
43 listeners.
They don't release their listening statistics, so proprietary.
We say good morning. 99.1 FM in Washington, 92.9 FM in Boston. Rumors, team surveillance in Boston in a week. We'll have more on that Monday. And also, I should say, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. David Gura, open question, politics. What will you listen for on the Sunday talk shows?
Well, I always listen to Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. She's coming up on the show. She's got Bill Hagerty on, the senator from Tennessee. Eager to hear just sort of what the Senate looks like in this next iteration. We heard from Mitch McConnell yesterday, who seemed like perhaps the happiest man in Washington as a result of what had happened here, kind of cements his legacy. But where do Republicans in the Senate take things from here? Any insight I can get into that will be useful over the course of the weekend.
Will we know the House by then? We may not.
I don't think so. I agree with Jessica Taylor, who said maybe not even by Monday.
Really?
Still a few more days to go.
Amazing. You know what's good for you and Lisa Mateo? Lisa, you guys missed Freebird being played on the radio every 12 minutes for 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well, I know when I play bluegrass, people always request it.
Yeah. I mean, it's Freebird. We're playing.
Have you played it before?
I poorly.
Poorly.
It's like Amy. I have never sung Amy and gotten the words correct.
Free as a bird.
Free as a bird. We're playing Mar-a-Lago music this morning. Kokomo earlier, Freebird.
Good morning, West Palm Beach.
Leonard Skinner.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. A Friday after these important elections. In a moment, David Gura and I will speak with Margaret Brennan of Face the Nation, find out the CBS story into the weekend towards Face the Nation. Lisa Mateo here, Michael Barr on assignment. Amy Morris helping out from Washington as well. Let's get right to it with red and green on the screen of Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. Brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around the clock. David Gura, we're going to go to Margaret here in a bit. Your thoughts on a Friday morning as you stagger to the Sunday talk shows?
Well, staggering in. I haven't slept very much, and it was a busy week. I'm just focused on the House and trying to see who's going to have the balance of power in Washington. If it's going to all be for Republicans or not. This is the last hope for the Democrats here, that they can secure those 4 seats they need to take over control of that lower house.
From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures mixed after this historic 3-day surge in the S&P 500. Right now, we'll start with S&P futures. They're a little change right now, down about 5 points. Dow futures, little change, up about 20 points. And the NASDAQ futures, down 0.3%, 65 points. Want to go to currencies. The dollar edging higher right now. The Chinese yuan weaker, down about 0.5%. This is after China announced that program to allow local governments to refinance debt. U.S. listed shares of Alibaba, they're down more than 4%. Bond yields, commodities also falling on that news. We have the 2-year yield 4.22%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.32%, and that is little changed. To earnings we go. Paramount, big gains in streaming subscribers in the third quarter, but overall sales, they were weaker than expected. Their shares up down nearly 1%. And two of the largest online reservation companies, strong outlook suggested travel growth is not slowing as fast as people thought. Expedia up 4%, but Airbnb down 6%. Analysts like the results, but they flag the impact of investments on margins. And finally, Rivian maintains its profitability target despite a part shortage. Its shares up 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks you so much. David Gura, across Wisconsin, took the Sikorsky into Pittsburgh, Indiana University in western Pennsylvania, then took I-80 across the big turn at Altoona and landed in Philadelphia. Bucks County, of course, up north, Scranton, President Biden's Scranton, up west, Erie, with its own unique politics. Where did Senator Bob Casey lose Pennsylvania? What part of that geography?
It mirrored a lot of what we saw with Vice President Harris, and the one county where we're still kind of waiting for votes to come in is just outside of Pittsburgh, and the McCormick campaign very content with how things are likely to shake out there. It's a red county, Cambria County outside of Pittsburgh. It was interesting. I heard Senator Casey speak the night before the election. He was at this big rally on the steps of the Art Museum in Philadelphia, and one was reminded just of his rich history in that state. His dad, a two-time governor of Pennsylvania. He's been in the Senate for 3 terms. He has yet to concede this race. He thinks that it's close enough that there should be a recount of the votes.
Will we get a recount?
He's pushing for that. Mr. McCormick has declared victory and has begun making the rounds on TV. He was on Fox News last night with Laura Ingraham. So he feels like he's got this all sewed up, but it will be by a very, very slim margin.
What kind of Republican is Mr. McCormick of Bridgewater?
That is a great question. He claims to be a Pennsylvania Republican. He was born in Pittsburgh and has a house on Squirrel Hill in the city. A lot of flack during the campaign he got was about not having lived there. He's been in Connecticut. He's been at the hedge fund that you mentioned just a moment ago. We'll see how closely he aligns with President-elect Trump, and indeed I'd love to talk to him in the coming days and see what
he has
to say about
shock of the
that.
election, I was so thrilled last night to listen to John Dickerson
CBS
with
News.
Steve Colbert, and I really can't say enough about John Dickerson slicing and dicing as the chief political correspondent at CBS and all that they're doing with the nightly news here in the future. And joining us now, Margaret Brennan, who knows John Dickerson so well. I'm absolutely fascinated, Margaret Brennan, of how CBS regroups off of the first Tuesday of November and reaches out to America with a heritage of Walter Cronkite being Midwest, not being New York. How will CBS reach out to America in the coming days and weeks?
Well, on Sunday, we'll try to understand what's coming next. So we will speak to Bill Hagerty, the senator from Tennessee, who's widely expected to become a cabinet member in a future Trump administration. He was U.S. ambassador to Japan for Donald Trump in the first term, had a role in the transition. We want to talk to him about what reality looks like. You know, there's one thing to say things on the campaign trail. There's another thing when it comes to actual governance. But what is this mandate that Republicans have with the Senate majority and possibly control of the House? What will it indicate for delivering on some of the campaign promises?
I look at this, Margaret, and, you know, everybody of all different persuasions just sort of thunderstruck by how America spoke. What have you learned in your reporting from your correspondence in the last 4 days? What sticks out to you is that one conversation you had with the CBS team?
You know, Anthony Salvanto, our head of elections and surveys, I've thought back a few times to things he said in recent weeks that were, in hindsight, clear warning signs for Democrats. Things like they had topped out their support on the issues of reproductive health care and state of democracy. They weren't growing support. He consistently for months was telling us it's the economy, and inflation, very much in Trump's favor. We talked about a scenario with a Republican wave, but you know, the polling still was showing this race could go on either way. I think we all, Republicans as party members themselves, were surprised at how much they had grown support among men of color, Latino men in particular. We already knew they had the white working class vote, that so-called bro vote had gone to the Trump team a long time ago. But I think we need to talk more about that disconnect. We've tried to do it on Face the Nation, but the disconnect between telling people the economic data is good and that not necessarily translating to the price of eggs is going to get $3 cheaper, right? That's your life.
Margaret,
I think more reporting needs to be done on that.
Let me bring in my colleague, David Gura. David with Margaret Brennan.
Margaret, nice to speak with you. And you mentioned Bill Hagerty, and I think of him on the Senate Banking Committee, which of course has been chaired for these last few years by Sherrod Brown of of Ohio. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on sort of how the shape of the Senate changes in light of what we had happen this week. So Sherrod Brown, of course, no longer on that committee, no longer in the Senate. What did you hear from Mitch McConnell yesterday as he took that victory lap, and sort of what's your sense of the direction of this Republican Senate and sort of how it buffets whatever agenda President Trump puts forward?
Well, I think we're have been in the midst of a massive realignment. So like these old, in terms of Republican and Democrats, really aren't traditional conservative Democrats any longer. Sherrod Brown was one of those examples of somebody who, was trying to straddle the divide in many ways. As Democrat lost that seat to a Colombian American, Bernie, there in Ohio. And so the other Ohio seat will become empty soon as J.D. Vance moves into the vice seat. But look, we're going to watch this race for control in Senate leadership. Mitch passing the torch.
Yeah.
Does that mean that this is, quote unquote, the place where stupid stuff goes to die? Does it become a fast track for Trump policies? Will it be that bulwark that Mitch McConnell had it be?
Margaret, I want to jump in. We're having trouble with the audio. You're up in your helicopter, and it's just not working out right now. But Margaret Brennan is the host of Face the Nation. Look for that in the CBS television networks Sunday morning. Listen to Face the Nation Sunday, 2 p.m. in New York, Washington, 92.9 FM in Boston. Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. All of us as parents, led by Dr. Lisa, we try to say to our children, what is the character and quality of no? Michael McKee was yesterday in the room for the character and quality of not one, but two no's. All these guys, I waited for McKee the last question, all the early people, Gina Smilik, Colby Smith, they're all asking important Fed questions. And the poor cherub sits up and asks the right question. Powell went mental. What was the quality of the mental you felt in the room?
Oh, I mean, we were all waiting for the question to come up, but then as soon as it did, he swatted it away. He was prepared for it, he was ready for it, and he wanted to make a definitive statement without going into too much detail. So one word did the trick for him.
There's confusion. Governors. Can any president-elect make him a governor and have a new chairman? Or move governors in and out, or presidents in and out?
You can say no if you want very loudly.
No.
Wait, that's at least a no.
Not legally permitted. Jay Powell already is a governor. If you're one of the officers of the Fed, you're a governor first, and then you take on the chairmanship or vice chairmanship. And so there are two different terms at work here. Jay Powell's term as chair is up in 2026, but his term on the Fed is not up until, as a governor, 2028. So in theory, he could stay on, and it would make it very hard for president to appoint a successor who is more like-minded towards the administration. There is one opening coming up in 2026 as a Fed governor, which he could fill and then elevate somebody, or he could find a Republican among the governors, although that isn't exactly easy to do.
Mike, we have seen this Fed chairman deal with the amount of pressure that Donald Trump put on him. What do we know of how, say, a Vice Chair Michael Barr might react to that? We heard we're talking a lot about Bill Hagerty this block, but he was on our air yesterday talking about how he thinks everything should be on the table, including trying to remove Michael Barr from that position. Not our Michael Barr, I should be clear with our audience here. How will he withstand that pressure? He, of course, so tied up with these banking regulations.
We might need to trade our Michael Barr to Detroit so he can watch his Lions now that they're finally good. We don't know exactly how Michael Barr would react, but he was chosen because he had a Democratic view of how to regulate, more regulation for banks, make them safer. And so it's an open question about whether he would resign his post. He can't be fired, but he could resign now. The big question is what happens to the Basel Endgame proposal, which the Fed is supposed to resubmit after doing a lot of outreach to the industry and communities. They're supposed to reissue that in the first of the year. And it's now, you can say it's basically dead on arrival, so they may not even proceed with that, which then if you're Barr, you say, do I want to stay?
Go back to Michigan.
30 seconds. Libby Cantrell was so upset with the election she couldn't mention. Denver Broncos, Kansas City Chiefs. Any hope of the Broncos upsetting the Red from Kansas City?
I don't think so. But Tom, speaking of sports, I have to mention, you and I, several years ago, we went to a hockey game in Washington, D.C.
We did.
I went.
Thank you, Reto.
I went on Wednesday night.
Did you?
To see the Capitals, and there is one thing that is good in Washington, and the Capitals are, it's almost a completely new young team, except for Ovechkin.
Ovechkin is still Ovechkin.
He scored the winning goal.
There you go.
So, so that's something for you to, to look forward to.
We thank Reto, keeper of the Amex, for making that happen. You know, it's great. Michael McKee, thank you so much. With important question yesterday to Chairman Powell. It was not an average, it was a different news conference, to say the least. We await December. Across the nation, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got futures mix following the Fed's decision to cut rates by a quarter point. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs changed its 2025 Fed call, seeing a slower pace for cuts. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 42 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 43 points. S&P futures little change, down 1 point. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The address is Department of the Navy, 1200 Navy Pentagon, Washington, D.C., 20350. 1200. Someone that knows that address called James Stavridis joins us now. His public service to the nation, the many books he has put out. But today, one theme for Admiral Stavridis. And I look, Admiral, at the Washington Post, which has the definitive article on it so far. And it's a lead article, Dan Lamont, Missy Ryan, and Alex Horton. And it's real simple. Pentagon anticipates major upheaval with Trump's return to the White House. They go through this, and what it comes down to is having a Pentagon with a political tone or tinge. Have we ever been here before?
No, and I hope we don't go there. I have seen reports that the new Trump administration might consider actually taking some of the generals and admirals out of their positions and bringing new ones in. That's just not how the military has worked. It's always been an apolitical force. It swears an oath of allegiance, not to the President of the United States, not to the Commander-in-Chief, but to the Constitution. Let's hope it stays that way.
Is there a gap, as I've read in history of any nation, between our officers, and particularly senior officers, in our enlisted forces, whether Air Force, Army, or Navy? Do you perceive a gap now between those two political emotions within our military?
I think there's always been such a gap between officers and enlisted men and women. And it's really an educational gap by and large. Officers almost universally have at least a bachelor's degree, Tom. Enlisted folks typically are not college educated. So the same fault lines you see in national polling between college educated and non-college educated, you see those in the military as well. Final thought, however, all of them, every single one of those volunteers, 1.5 million in the Department of Defense, swear that oath of allegiance to the Constitution.
Admiral, once I was so angry at David Gura, I threw the leader's bookshelf at him and said, shut up and read this, David. Go back to Sparta and Greece. David Gura
may have happened more than
Stavridis.
once. Admiral, great to speak with you. And in that piece that Tom referenced, Richard Cohn is quoted, of course, at the Venerable Peace, War, and Defense program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And he says, Mr. Trump does not have a real understanding of civil-military relations or the importance of a nonpartisan, non-political military. Who is going to educate him on that? As you look back on the last Trump term, it was something he clearly struggled with. Who is in a position to make it clear to him the way things have worked and indeed should work in this country?
I'll give you three names that come to my mind. One is Mike Pompeo, who was the director of the CIA and then was the Secretary of State, West Point graduate, #1 in his class. He could help. Number two, the last national security advisor, former Ambassador Robert O'Brien, very well grounded, steady. I think he could be in a position to be helpful. And third, the last deputy national security advisor, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, retired, also understands all of that. Those are names that I'm actively seeing under consideration in a Trump administration. Dave, we're just going to have to wait and see who he puts in positions of authority. That'll give us a clue where we're headed.
Right. Admiral, would you serve the president-elect?
I have never turned down a request for service from the country, and I will leave it at that, Tom.
Admiral, you're out with a new column here at Bloomberg Opinion focusing on NATO. You say your phone has been ringing off the hook from worried U.S. allies in Europe in particular who are wondering about what's going to happen with NATO. What is your best guess of the path forward here for that alliance, given the rhetoric that we've heard on this campaign trail, given what we heard when Donald Trump was in the White House last time?
One of my European colleagues called me and said, are these the last days of NATO? The short answer is, I don't think so. I think it's highly unlikely a Trump administration would simply pull out of the alliance. But it's going to get uncomfortable over two issues. One is defense spending. The Europeans are going to have to continue to raise their defense spending well above, I think, 2% of gross domestic product, maybe 2.5 or even 3%. That gets into the zip code of the United States and our spending. And the second one is over Ukraine. If the U.S., as has been brooded about by both Trump and Vance, decides to cut off aid to Ukraine, that'll put pressure on the Europeans to support Ukraine. Both of those issues could become wedge issues in the alliance. Final thought, Dave, I think that we'll be okay here. We'll work through those challenges, but it's going to be bumpy times in Brussels.
What is your perspective on what happens with Ukraine? It seems like the president-elect is so hell-bent on ending this with some kind of settlement, maybe before Ukraine wants to have this conflict ended. Is that a foregone conclusion now? And as we talk about the relationship between the U.S. and European nations, do you foresee a moment when, if that's what a President Donald Trump is advocating for, Europe says we're going to go this alone, we have to continue to support the Ukrainian cause?
I think the latter is a real possibility, that if a Trump administration simply walks away from Ukraine, a lot of the Europeans, particularly the big four, Germany, UK, France, and Italy, those have the capacity collectively to support the Ukrainians, frankly. I don't think it'll quite get there, and here's how I think it plays out. I think Trump will put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians to negotiate. I think Trump will put pressure on the Russians to negotiate. That negotiation could follow a ceasefire early in a Trump administration. How would it come out? I think the Russians probably would end up with Crimea, 4 provinces of Donbass, about 20% of Ukraine. They're in it now. It's going to be hard to get them out militarily. The rest of Ukraine, the other 80%, I think sails on, free, democratic, and eventually has a path to NATO.
Admiral, your book 2034 is happening in real time. This from the Associated Press. In the last 4 hours, Marcos of the Philippines angers China with new laws to demarcate South China Sea territories. Do you see a continuity moving from Secretary Austin to President-elect Trump's new Secretary of Defense?
I do. I think, again, within the framework of the Department of Defense, I'm hopeful that we can keep politics at a minimum and have a good transition. And for listeners who don't know this, the Philippines have the same security guarantees that the NATO members do, the Pacific. And by the way, as you know, Tom, I've written a new book called The Restless Wave about World War II. Part of the reason I wrote that book is to help us understand the sweep, scale, scope of a war, in this case with China, during World War II, as I talk about in The Restless Wave with Japan. We need to avoid that.
Never enough time. James Stavridis, thank you so much. Perhaps we'll see you called again for public service. The Admiral, of course, of the U.S. Navy. David, your thoughts on Admiral Stavridis' intensity there?
Incredible intensity, and of course he was the Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, and I think it's a cause about which he cares so much and cares so deeply, and I think we're just at a moment here where that's really going to be front and center as we move to this new administration. I was bringing up what's happening in Ukraine. That'll be so key, I think, to what happens, what the trajectory of that is going forward.
I can't convey the importance of the image of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. holding up the document from Manila saying that there are going to be new laws to demarcate the South China Sea. I promise we'll get Robert Kaplan on, expert on the geography of the South China Sea. I know it's away, it's 12 time zones away, but it's something that the new administration can't ignore as they consider Ukraine, as they consider the Levant as well. What a time. Please stay with us from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And the opening bell report brought to you by JP Morgan Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest growing investment vehicle with a new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETF insights to learn more. All right, how are we going to get these markets started after another record close on Wall Street? Now, despite a little movement we see this morning, the S&P 500 Dow Industrial still on track to deliver their best weekly performances in a year. All right, we're off and running. Let's get to it. Starting with the S&P 500, up about 0.1%, 6 points at 5,979. The Dow up 0.3%, 157 points, 43,882. The NASDAQ, little change, down about 10 points at 19,259. We head over to the two-year yield, 4.21%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.30%, and that's down 2 basis points. We have Brent crude down about 1.5%, $74 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,696 an ounce. As we look at currencies, the dollar stronger. Japanese yuan down about 0.5%. Japanese yen stronger. We have euro, British pound weaker, and Bitcoin right now up 0.3% at around 76,000. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it here. Green on the screen on our first lift up here. VIX again is huge. 22 pre-election. Thank you, Dean Kernet, yesterday for VIX. Real VIX wisdom, if you would. 14.79 on the VIX.
What did he say? What is his 12, 13? What was his?
He said lower.
Ballpark,
he
right?
sort of hedged it to where
teens.
we are, 14, low teens.
Yep.
But 12, I mean, folks, the SPX is 5980. Futures printed as 6,000 this morning. We're all readjusting to this. Anybody that tells you they're, David, that they're used to these levels or that, this is new territory. For bulls, for Ed Yardeni, for Brian Belskett BMO, I'm sorry, they're adjusting to this lift that we see in the market. We'll see where we end up at 4 o'clock today. Carol and Tim will no doubt do that for you. We just had James Stavridis on, encyclopedic on military forces and power around the world. In an international relations, and particularly the transatlantic divide, even David owns the high ground with Moneta Group. And what I love about what she does is at the end of her research note, she's got winners and losers. Some of the losers: renewable energy, chip stocks, question mark, diversity and all that. We know all this. NATO, Europe, Ukraine, Asian exporters, and economic growth. Even David at Moneta Group, who wins on the transatlantic discussion with a Trump presidency?
Very interesting question. And I should say that this chart came from July. So I think it just goes to show how much all markets had really, it's been very well telegraphed. And in a way, the Trump trade played out exactly as expected. And that was really what we've been talking about since July. So who are the winners on this side of the Atlantic? And I will add, I'm sitting on this side of the Atlantic right now in London. It doesn't look like there are many winners at the moment. There is a lot of consternation over here around what Trump trade policy will mean for trading partners such as Europe. There is, as I said, quite a bit of concern around what this means for NATO, in particular Ukraine and the situation there. And we are used in Europe to see changes in elections and to incumbents being thrown out. That's happened many times in the last year here in Europe. However, this is different because of the sheer effect that the US has on international relations.
You mentioned the sort of contours of and the trajectory of the Trump trade. Have we reached its end? I kind of wonder where things stand here at the end of this week. There was such frenzy, of course, after Election Day and the immediate days after. Where does it stand now, and sort of how does positioning change now that the dust has somewhat settled here?
I would say we're only very much in early innings of the Trump trade. There was an initial euphoria, and that we can see it's actually trickled into small cap stocks, which have outperformed large cap this week. So a sense that perhaps an isolationist approach, tariffs would all play into those small cap stocks that don't necessarily rely on international trade and would benefit from a more America first approach. So that's been very interesting. That wasn't necessarily even in the Trump trade. Some things such as deregulation will have a much slower burn, and we can see that playing well into industries such as financials that don't get affected by tariffs typically. I would also say that, things like Bitcoin, that's going to be very much more a slow burn. We're going to see that occurring much over time as we see who personnel to put in place. So it's going to play out over time.
Who is leading now in European austerity? I mean, Kit Jukes at SocGen this morning with a brutal note on the future of Germany and their trade flows, their manufacturing flows. But even David, does austerity still work for Europe, or do they join Trump with a fiscal largesse, as we saw with President Biden?
I would say austerity is a fact of life for much of Europe. They've got quite used to it. We can see an economy like Spain, for example, growing faster than the US currently. So a remarkable turnaround from a country that did have high unemployment. A lot of my business school friends, for example, have moved to Spain, seen as a very desirable place to live, and that has worked for them. Austerity, though, is a fact of life for Europe. It is a higher tax environment, and we know that it's much slower growth. There has been a Draghi report making suggestions as to how growth can be initiated really in Europe, and it would take a lot of concerted action to do that. There is a real sense that there are many sick men of Europe currently, and it's just a question of how we generate that growth, particularly with a more isolationist US.
Looking at those sick men of Europe and thinking through what President Trump's tariffs policies might be, I think there's been a lot of speculation that this time is different. The capacity for Europe to withstand whatever Trump throws at Europe is markedly different than it was. What do you say to that? How does Europe change its tack to deal with whatever the incoming president throws at it?
I suppose it's always, I like to point to the positive in terms of the resilience that Europe has shown in the light of, for example, the energy pressures coming from the Russia-Ukraine situation. It did actually not suffer as greatly as it thought it would in terms of higher energy prices. They were transitory, short-lived. It has very much kept inflation in check. The ECB has been cutting rates. Has been responding proactively to that. So I would say that is all quite positive. As to how much exposure Europe has to Trump's trade policy, not perhaps as much as is feared, because as in terms of how much is actually imported into the US from Europe, not nearly as much as, say, would come from Mexico and China.
Even on Monday, you're talking to a family, and it's, two brothers, a sister, some grandchildren, and they're squabbling over their future of their family office money. What do you say to them about conviction to participate in the equity markets?
First of all, if anybody needs to participate in an inflationary environment, and we know we are in an inflationary environment, we need to have growth assets. So even though bonds have been quite interesting, cash has been decent with rates of around 4 or 5%, nobody's going to really stay rich by investing in bonds with inflation going to hover. It's going to be above 2%, I believe, for some time. So equity is the energy of growth, is the engine of growth. And so therefore, it really is about, there doesn't have to be conviction necessarily in the Mag 7. If there was conviction in this as a growth engine, it should be a broad-based exposure across the spectrum, across value and growth, not necessarily non-US for a US family. And that's really, it's about a long-term game here.
Even David, thank you so much. With Moneta, I should say, just wonderful there on the transatlantic perspective. David Gura looking at the equity risk premium.
Tell me about this. I had someone say to me, take a look at the equity risk premium, lowest level in more than 2 decades. To an idiot like me, why is that something to pay attention to?
Whether in fixed income or in equity, there is a parsing of the trend. How much is because of interest rates? How much is because of risk and the risk premium they talk about? In bonds, it's much more codified. There's a book, David, you should read. Okay. It's 1,200 pages. Frank Fabozzi. And he will talk in there about the term premium, which is more jargon that you've seen. But the equity risk premium has to do with a soup, a mathematical soup of volatility, of spirit, of dynamics. The problem is the deeper you go down the hole, the more complex it gets, and the more complex the math gets. Mm-hmm. For just one example, there's a strange word called covariance, where that you enjoy flunking this on a CFA exam. Within a complex system, folks, a covariance equation, it goes from here, it's over by Central Park where the epsilon is on the back end. So you got to be very careful about taking quant stuff or equity algebra and bringing it over to, should I buy more Apple?
I see, okay.
Because, the fundamental story can be just as important, and some like me would say more important, but it's out there. Why are we doing this on a Friday?
I don't know, sorry.
Amy Morris is like, this is way too much heavy lifting on a Friday.
Yeah.
Right now, the Dow up 10 points. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Tom. President-elect Donald Trump named Susie Wiles as his White House chief of staff. She is a veteran Republican political operative who helped Trump navigate his presidential campaign. She will be the first ever woman to serve as White House chief of staff. And one of Trump's most highly anticipated cabinet picks will be his Treasury Secretary. More on that from Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries.
There's a lot of names out there that'll be familiar to people. Scott Bessent of Key Square Capital Management. He has been a big advocate for Trump on the campaign trail, a big fundraiser, and a big critic of current Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries notes Trump's first Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was one of the few in his cabinet who filled out the full term. The People's March on Washington is now set for January 18th on the National Mall, ahead of Trump's inauguration. The event is being organized by groups like the Women's March and Abortion Access Now, a collaborative campaign from the American Civil Liberties Union, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, the National Women's Law Center, and others. Organizers right now are expecting 50,000 people. And Tom wanted a little light news. Here you go. Authorities in South Carolina are still trying to round up dozens of little monkeys that escaped after an employee apparently failed to properly secure their enclosure. Y'all, this is home. This is where I'm from. Surveyor Daniel Vance says he got a big surprise while he was working near the Alpha Genesis Primate Research Center in Yamasee this week.
I told my coworker, and we got out and got a little closer to see, but we didn't want to get too close for obvious reasons. And yeah, it was many monkeys.
Many monkeys. 43 young
what
female
do they
monkeys
do,
escaped.
Amy? What? I mean, team coverage here, monkey reporting from the Carolinas. How do you capture 40X monkeys?
You get lots of yummy food and grapes and bananas, and you lay it out where you want them to go. And when they get hungry, because they will, because they don't know how to go forage for food for themselves in the low country.
No.
They don't want shrimp.
No, well.
Okay. Wild Kingdom with Amy Morris. Thank you so much for that today. Over 5 years ago, I sat in the TV room at the Manse, and Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC transfixed us with the burning of Notre Dame. It was absolutely extraordinary. Steph did a great job keeping it together as we saw Notre Dame down in ashes. Today, the bells of Notre Dame. Not for the Olympics, but finally now, David, and it's amazing what they've done. I haven't really seen the architectural stuff. We've watched some videos at home of the rebuilding, but time marches on and it's reopened.
Just immense bells, and just I think back on the promise that the French president made to get this reopened within 5 years, and lo, here we are. I think they're going to have a big ceremony in early December to mark the occasion, but it's emotional for you. I can't imagine what it's like for Parisians who heard them after such a long interregnum there.
Lisa, I say it says road trip.
Yeah.
I mean, team surveillance coverage.
We have to see it for ourselves.
Thank you.
And
that's what we need to do. Well, there we are, Notre Dame with bells today as well. We're going to continue here and, of course, pick up the pieces from the election. Our lead story today, without question, and David, really a value add here, is we don't know who's going to run the House yet. Is it 10 votes away, David?
I think we're at 20-something, the low 20s, so it'll still be.
They're 20 to decide.
But it's a 4-seat margin. The Democrats need to take 4 seats.
They need just to win 4 of the 20 seats.
Correct. Yeah.
Really?
Well, that's not right. They have to reach that threshold. They need 4 seats more than they had to do it.
Okay. Lisa, did you understand what David said?
I'll text you over the weekend when it happens. I'm still stuck on your 1,200-page book about the risk premium.
Frank Fabozzi. I can see,
I'll borrow your copy from the lending library.
Bond guru David Gura will be with us. Mr. Fabozzi in Connecticut, we say good morning to you. The Dow up 57 points.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, we've got a little movement in stocks, and this is at the end of their best week in 2024, and this is after Donald Trump was elected president. Bank of America says $20 billion flowed into U.S. equity funds in the day Trump claimed victory. Right now, let's get to stocks. We have the NASDAQ down about 0.1%, 18 points at 19,250. The Dow up 0.2%, 86 points at 43,817. The S&P 500 up 0.1%, 8 points at 5,981. We have the two-year yield 4.22%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.30%, and that's down 2 basis points. Pinterest outlook really spoken investors as it forecasts a drop in demand from certain advertisers. Its shares are down 13%. And revenge travel not over. Online travel giants Airbnb, Expedia, they showed strong outlooks. Expedia right now up 6%, but Airbnb is down 7%. Analysts have flagged the impact of investments on margins. And we talked earlier about bourbon. Well, there's an article in the Terminal today, you have to look at it, about some of the weirdest cocktails around, like the sour cream and onion martini at the corner store in Soho. You couldn't get that. How about the smoky cigarette martini at New York City's Tigre? It's supposed to taste like you're kissing someone after they smoke a cigarette. I don't know. I think I'll pass. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's un-American.
Tune on. You got to have YouTube up to see your expression, Tom.
Yeah.
That last one, that was a good.
It's just un-American. Really? People are desperate.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's to be different.
They pay you to have the martini. Thank you, Lisa Mateo. Greatly appreciate it. This is great. He comes on, he's a coach and he's like low key and all that. Victory lap, but the season's not over. Joining us now, the coach of Harvard football. And I'm sorry, coach, first year in the racket, 6-1. You beat Dartmouth. Let's just start with the Dartmouth bubble.
You brought this up yesterday.
The Dartmouth bubble yesterday. What was it like in the last couple minutes at Dartmouth? Describe that in your first year coaching Harvard football.
Yeah, so we were down 10 points in the fourth quarter there, and the guys were really, really calm. And I was very confident. I was calm. Yes. We got to the end there and we took the lead and they had the ball and, with how much time left, it was probably going to end up being a Hail Mary by them at the end. And, it's ironic because we had practiced that exact same situation on Wednesday. So it was fresh in all the players' minds. Right. So we had the opportunity we still had timeout left. So we had the opportunity to call timeout and just remind the guys of doing their job, because that's what happens in those situations. Right. You have guys who just get lost in the moment of the situation and they do something that's not what they're trained to do. And that's what, the Bears Commanders game the previous week was a crazy play where a bunch of guys jump for the ball. That's not what you're supposed to do in that situation. So I was surprisingly calm. Yes. Andrew
Orrick with us. He's surprisingly calm today. Of course, a kickoff 12 p.m. Eastern, and we'll have it for 92.9 Boston, 11:45 here on Saturday. And this is really important. Here's the codification. Columbia is the doormat of the Ivy League. No. How do you get your players up for Columbia, who's been getting it done the last couple years?
Well, the reality is we lost to Brown week 2. And from that point forward, we really had our back against the wall in the Ivy League, because you can't bank on a 2-loss team winning the Ivy League at any point. Even though it's happened very few times. So our players have had the right mindset from that point forward. And with how well Columbia is doing, they know how well Columbia's doing. So it's not like there's any mind tricking that needs to happen with them or anything. Like, they've had the same mindset of we got to go about our business every single week. So they've been great this week.
David Gura, Columbia national titles, 1875 in 1933.
Okay, very good. I should say Harvard does have the edge in this rivalry. Let me ask you about one player in particular. That's your quarterback, Jaden Craig, threw 311 yards in that game last week and 4th in the nation in passing efficiency. What are his particular gifts, aside from him being an economics concentrator, which is appealing to us here on Surveillance?
Really, really strong arm. He's big, but he's also very athletic. I would say where he's really taken a big step this year is that he's seen the field really well, and he's going through his progressions really well, and extending plays. So a lot of times when things break down in the pocket and you get out in the perimeter, quarterbacks just they can't keep their eyes downfield. And what he's done a really good job of is he gets out of the pocket and he's not thinking necessarily run. He's thinking, get my eyes downfield, because the receivers now are, turning into scramble drill mode. And he's done a really good job with that. And that's led to some really big plays throughout the season.
Andrew Ork, thank you so much. Coach Ork, his first year at Harvard University, started out a little shaky. Boom, first place, beating Dartmouth and, of course, Columbia this Saturday. Kickoff, 12 p.m. Eastern. Pregame starts 15 minutes early, 11:45 a.m. Hear that at 92.9 FM in Boston. And just a note, thank you to all of you from Mount Katahdin down to Block Island for listening on 92.9. Really can't say enough about the interest we're getting there.
We got to get you to the game, the Harvard-Yale game, which I think is in Cambridge this year.
I can see it. I don't see Cornell listed here.
No. The coach and I had some words about that on the heels of it. You were out, but we caught up after that game, and it was hard fought by my Big Red.
Hard fought.
The Crimson prevailed.
Yeah, well,
Shaoul Stadium.
I remember. Yeah. Is it? It's not the old one. They like.
It is. No, it is beautiful.
It's still the old one.
Yeah. Right across from the Liner Rink.
Yeah, which is the big. They do better in Big Red Hockey. Of course, there's a game at Madison Square Garden every year.
After Thanksgiving. You want to go? You want to go?
I may go this year. Scarlet Foo's invited me. Scarlet Foo will be there. David Gura will be there. Maybe I'll darken.
In the past, BU has played, and one Ted Fine has been there as well. We've had some fun butting of heads.
It's too much. Too exciting. You've been there too, Rich Truman? Okay. Very, very good. Red and green on the screen. Dow up 0.2%, 103. Let me give you those levels. It's important. 43,800 Dow, 5985 SPX, 21,100 NASDAQ. My head is spinning over all of those. We're going to drive here through the day. David Gura is still with us, and of course, he'll be doing the big take. Do you know what you're doing in the big take today? Like, are you looking at the congressional race in Reno, Nevada, or something specific?
We're definitely looking ahead to the next presidency. So we're kind of figuring out how we approach that and how we strike that balance. I think we'll all be figuring that out in the coming days.
Will he be quieter to the inauguration, or does he get out front making statements in cabinet?
He has
and all
been
that?
quieter than I would have expected thus far. So we've been talking a bit about him selecting his chief of staff. I mean, that was done without a lot of in-person fanfare. Released a statement, his spokesperson did, and so we'll see if we have the same kind of parade of notables that we saw back in 2016, 2017.
The number one thing brought up to me by listeners, thank you so much for the comments, is 2016, I believe he was 70. In 2024, he's 78.
That's right.
Does age make a difference here in piecing together the first 100 days of a second term?
Well, he would tell you not. He'd say he's as vital as ever, but he is older. We can all recognize the slow progression of time. And
why are you looking at me like
I'm
that?
not. I'm looking around the room. Hi, John. Nice to see you.
Where's Sweeney?
Where is Sweeney?
We say good morning to all of you. Let's review this. I got to get this out. Cy Benson's going to save me here. We've got a poll to see what you want to hear on Bloomberg Radio. One of the questions: do you want more John Tucker? And they said,
well,
yes. Where you go?
He's been doing the survey.
To a serious poll. Thank you, Material. Thank you, Material, for helping us with the poll. It's out at YouTube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. You find the poll. It's on the community. There's a path there to get to it. We urge you to take that poll to say, we love Lisa Mateo. We need more of the Lisa Mateo Hour. What do you want to hear on Bloomberg Radio? Take the poll. We're serious, independent, and all that. And we'll see from there.
And people are so excited about polling. I mean, no, they haven't taken any lately. So.
Can we all make a promise that this weekend,
yes,
the 45 emails I have asking for money,
from me,
from Democrats and Republicans, I get it ecumenical. I get both parties.
Yes, well,
and it's just overwhelming.
Yeah,
I mean, when does that stop? I mean, we have to see on that. Dow up 120 points as well. We say good morning. Thank you to our team for a spectacular election week. Thank you, David Gura.
And the bluegrass on the way out. Mighty Poplar.
Mighty Poplar. Gura insisted. Good morning.
And a Navajo ring, busted flat, broken, split open wide. And And the springtime's coming up on the divide.